Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. My name is Vembo and I'm glad you're here. Today's video is a bit of a special one. It's a long one, so go ahead and get comfortable. Whether you're watching from work, chilling at home, or just need something to throw on in the background, this is the perfect time to settle in. The video you're about to watch is a full compilation of some of my previous uploads, but don't skip ahead just yet, because the first hour is filled with brand new stories you haven't seen before, fresh content, new twists, and plenty to keep you locked in. Also, if you've been enjoying the videos and want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. Members get early access to videos like this one, and also get to help decide what topics I cover in the future. It's a great way to be part of the process and keep the content flowing. Thanks for being here, and let's jump right into it. Let's start with this absolute doozy from Am I the Arsehole? I'm 34 years old, and I've been married to my wife Lisa for 8 years. We have 2 kids together, ages 5 and 7. Lisa has always been close with her sister Monica, who's 29 and has never really had her life together. Monica dropped out of college twice, can't hold down a job for more than 6 months, and has this habit of making everyone else's problems her emergency. About 2 years ago, Monica got pregnant. She wasn't with the father anymore, said he was a deadbeat who wanted nothing to do with the baby. Lisa immediately went into protective big sister mode and insisted we help Monica out. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I love my wife, so I agreed to let Monica stay in our guest room until she got back on her feet. That was supposed to be temporary. 2 years later, Monica is still living in our house, rent-free, contributing absolutely nothing to household expenses and treating our home like her personal hotel. She leaves dishes everywhere, doesn't clean up after herself, and expects Lisa to watch the baby whenever she wants to go out with friends. The breaking point came last month. I came home from work to find Monica had thrown a party in our living room while Lisa was at work and our kids were at school. There were empty beer bottles everywhere, cigarette butts on our patio, and someone had spilled red wine on our white carpet. When I confronted Monica about it, she laughed and said it wasn't that big of a deal, that I needed to lighten up. I told Lisa that night that Monica needed to move out. Lisa got defensive and said Monica was going through a hard time, that she was family and we couldn't just abandon her. I said I understood that, but Monica had been taking advantage of our generosity for 2 years, and it was affecting our marriage and our home life. Lisa accused me of being heartless and said I was trying to make her choose between her sister and her husband. I told her I wasn't asking her to choose. I was asking her to set boundaries with someone who was clearly using us. Things escalated from there. Lisa said if I forced Monica to leave, she'd never forgive me. I said if Monica didn't leave, I was going to start looking for my own place, because I was done living like this. The next morning, I woke up to find that Lisa had packed bags for herself and our kids. She said they were going to stay at her mother's house until I came to my senses and apologized to Monica. She took our children and left, and that was 3 weeks ago. I've been texting and calling, trying to get Lisa to come home so we can talk about this rationally, but she's not responding. Monica is still living in our house, acting like nothing happened, and now she's telling people that I kicked out my own wife and children over a little mess. Yesterday, Lisa's mother called me and said I was destroying my family over petty grievances, that Monica is a single mother who needs support, and that a real man would step up and help family instead of being selfish. She said if I don't apologize and ask Monica to stay permanently, Lisa is going to file for divorce. I feel like I'm going crazy. All I wanted was for someone who's been freeloading in our house for 2 years to start contributing or find her own place. Now I'm being painted as the villain who broke up his own family. Monica is telling everyone that I've been hostile toward her from day one, which isn't true. I tried to be welcoming and supportive, but there's only so much a person can take. My friends are split. Some say I should have put my foot down sooner. Others say I should just suck it up for the sake of my marriage. But the thought of Monica living in our house permanently continuing to take advantage while contributing nothing, makes me feel sick. So am I the arsehole for giving my wife an ultimatum about her sister? That story is over. Wow, this guy's living in an actual nightmare scenario where his kindness got weaponized against him. 2 years of free housing, and this woman throws a party in his living room like she owns the place. The audacity is genuinely breathtaking. And now his wife has essentially chosen her freeloading sister over their marriage and kids. This isn't about family loyalty anymore. This is about basic respect and boundaries. Sometimes being the reasonable person in an unreasonable situation makes you look like the bad guy, but this man is absolutely not the arsehole here. Let's move on to something that'll make your blood boil in a completely different way. This happened about 6 months ago, but I'm still furious about it, and my therapist suggested I write it out. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and I work as a paediatric nurse at a children's hospital. It's demanding work, both emotionally and physically, but I love what I do. I was shopping at Target on a Saturday afternoon, still in my scrubs because I'd just gotten off a 12-hour shift. I was exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep, and I just needed to grab some groceries and essentials before heading home. I was in the pharmacy section looking for some ibuprofen when this woman, probably in her 50s, approached me with her cart. She had this entitled look on her face that I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Excuse me," she said, snapping her fingers at me. "I need you to get me the good cough medicine from behind the counter, the stuff that actually works." I looked at her, confused. "I'm sorry, I don't work here, I'm just shopping." She looked me up and down with this disgusted expression. "Don't lie to me. You're wearing scrubs. Obviously, you work here in the pharmacy." I explained that I was a nurse at the children's hospital and that I was just shopping after my shift. I even showed her my hospital ID badge that was still clipped to my scrubs. Instead of apologising, she got angry. "Well, if you're really a nurse, then you should be helping people. It's your job to help sick people, and I'm sick. I have a terrible cough, and I need medicine." I told her again that I didn't work at Target, that she needed to speak to an actual pharmacy employee, and that I was off duty and just trying to do my own shopping. That's when she completely lost it. She started yelling that I was a terrible nurse, that I obviously didn't care about helping people, and that she was going to report me to whatever hospital I worked at for being rude and unprofessional. Other customers were starting to stare, and I could feel my face getting hot with embarrassment. I tried to walk away, but she followed me, continuing to berate me about how healthcare workers should always be willing to help, and that I was probably a fake nurse anyway, because real nurses care about people. Finally, an actual Target employee came over to see what the commotion was about. The woman immediately switched tactics and told the employee that I was a Target pharmacy worker who was refusing to help her and being extremely rude. The Target employee looked at me questioningly, and I had to explain the entire situation again. Meanwhile, this woman is still insisting that because I'm wearing scrubs, I obviously work there, and I'm just trying to get out of doing my job. The Target employee was great. She calmly explained to the woman that I was clearly a customer, that scrubs don't mean someone works at Target, and that she would be happy to help her find what she needed in the pharmacy section. But the woman wasn't done. She demanded to speak to a manager, and when the manager came over, she told him that his employee, meaning me, had been incredibly rude and unprofessional, and that she wanted me fired. The manager looked at me, and I had to go through the whole explanation again. He was very apologetic and told the woman that I didn't work there, but she kept insisting that I was lying, and that everyone was covering for me. Finally, I'd had enough. I was exhausted, I just wanted to go home, and I was tired of being harassed by this entitled woman. I pulled out my phone and showed her photos from my shift that day. Pictures of me with my paediatric patients that I take for their families, my hospital schedule, everything. I said, "Mom, I just spent 12 hours taking care of sick children. I've been on my feet all day. I haven't eaten a real meal, and I'm running on no sleep. I'm not trying to avoid helping you. I literally cannot help you because I don't work here. Please leave me alone." She stared at the photos for a minute and I thought maybe she was finally going to realise her mistake and apologise. Instead, she said, "Well, if you're really a paediatric nurse, then you should know about cough medicine. You're still being unhelpful." At that point, I just walked away. The manager followed me and apologised profusely, said they'd handled the situation and that I was welcome to finish my shopping in peace. I did see the woman later in the checkout line, and she was still complaining loudly to anyone who would listen about how rude the Target pharmacy staff had been to her. The whole thing was so absurd and frustrating. I spend my days taking care of sick kids, dealing with worried parents, making life or death decisions, and this woman wanted to publicly humiliate me because I wouldn't pretend to be a Target employee to help her buy cough drops. That story is over. The sheer entitlement of some people never ceases to amaze me. This woman saw scrubs and immediately decided this nurse owed her personal medical consultation in the middle of Target. Even after seeing proof that she worked at a children's hospital, she still demanded free medical advice. Healthcare workers already deal with enough without random strangers harassing them during their off hours. The audacity of following someone around a store yelling at them because they won't pretend to work there is just mind-blowing. Here's another one that had me questioning humanity. I'm 31 and I've been with my girlfriend Rachel for about 4 years. She has a 9-year-old daughter, Chloe, from a previous relationship. Chloe's biological father isn't in the picture, and I've basically been acting as her stepdad since Rachel and I got serious. I really care about Chloe. I help with homework, I go to her school events, I've taught her how to ride a bike, all that stuff. She calls me by my first name, which is fine, and I consider her family, even though Rachel and I aren't married yet. Here's where it gets complicated. I'm really into photography. It's been my hobby for about 10 years, and I've got some expensive equipment, professional cameras, lenses, lighting gear, the whole setup. It's probably worth around $15,000 total, and I've built up this collection slowly over the years. Chloe has shown some interest in photography lately. She's always asking to see my cameras and wants to know how everything works. I've been teaching her the basics with one of my older, less expensive cameras, and she's actually pretty good at it for a kid. Last month, Rachel suggested that for Chloe's 10th birthday, I should give her one of my cameras as a gift. Not one of the cheap ones I let her practice with, but one of my professional cameras worth about $3,000. I was taken aback. I explained that these cameras are really expensive and not appropriate for a 10-year-old. They're delicate, they require a lot of technical knowledge to use properly, and honestly, I wasn't comfortable giving away equipment that expensive. Rachel got upset and said I was being selfish. She said that if I really cared about Chloe, I would want to support her interests and help her develop her talent. She pointed out that I have multiple cameras, so it's not like I'd be giving away my only one. I tried to explain that it's not about the money, it's about the fact that these are professional tools that took me years to save up for. I offered to buy Chloe a really nice, beginner camera that would be more appropriate for her age and skill level. Something in the $300 to $500 range. Rachel said that wasn't good enough. She said Chloe deserves the best equipment if she's going to learn properly, and that I was basically telling her daughter that she wasn't worth investing in. The argument escalated from there. Rachel accused me of treating Chloe like she was less important than my hobby. She said that a real father figure would prioritize the child over material possessions. I pointed out that I never said Chloe wasn't important, just that a $3,000 camera isn't an appropriate gift for a 10-year-old. I mentioned that most professional photographers don't start with equipment that expensive, that it's something you work up to. Rachel then said something that really hurt. She said that since I'm not Chloe's real father, maybe I don't understand what it means to make sacrifices for your child. She said that if I can't step up and be generous when it matters, maybe I'm not ready to be part of their family. That stung because I've been trying really hard to be a good father figure to Chloe. I've spent thousands of dollars on her over the years for clothes, toys, school supplies, activities. I've rearranged my schedule countless times for her events. I've been there for her in every way I can think of. But apparently, not being willing to give away expensive professional equipment makes me selfish and uncommitted. The birthday party was last weekend, and I did buy Chloe a really nice beginner camera setup. It cost me about $400, and it came with a case, extra batteries, memory cards, everything she'd need to get started. Chloe seemed happy with it, but Rachel was cold to me the entire party. She made several comments in front of family and friends about how some people talk about caring but don't back it up with actions. Now Rachel is saying that I've shown my true colours, that I prioritise my stuff over her daughter, and that she's reconsidering our relationship because she needs someone who will put Chloe first in all situations. I'm so confused. I thought I was being reasonable by buying an age-appropriate gift instead of handing over professional equipment to a child. But Rachel is acting like I've committed some terrible betrayal. Her sister even called me and said I was being ridiculous, that it's just a camera and I should have given Chloe what she wanted for her birthday. She said that if I really loved Chloe, the money wouldn't matter. I feel like I'm being manipulated, but I also wonder if I'm being too protective of my equipment. Maybe I should have just given her the expensive camera and hoped for the best. Am I the arsehole for not giving my girlfriend's daughter my professional camera equipment? That story is over. This is emotional manipulation at its finest, and I'm genuinely angry on this guy's behalf. A professional camera worth $3,000 is not an appropriate gift for a 10-year-old, period. The fact that he bought her a $400 setup shows he absolutely supports her interest and wants to help her learn. But Rachel is using his love for Chloe as a weapon to guilt him into giving away expensive equipment that he worked years to afford. The comment about not being her real father was particularly cruel and designed to make him prove his commitment by making unreasonable sacrifices. Let me tell you about something that happened that will make you want to lock your doors and never let anyone in your house again. I'm 23 and I live with 3 roommates in a house we rent together. One of my roommates, Tyler, has this girlfriend named Jessica who basically moved in without anyone's permission about 4 months ago. She doesn't pay rent, doesn't contribute to utilities, and acts like she owns the place. At first we tried to be cool about it. Relationships happen, people spend nights over, whatever. But Jessica started leaving her stuff everywhere, using our food without asking, and hogging the bathroom for hours every morning. When we brought it up to Tyler, he said we were being dramatic and that she'd start contributing once she found a job. That was 4 months ago. She's still unemployed, still not paying anything, and now she's bringing friends over without asking and treating our living room like her personal hangout space. Last week I came home to find Jessica had rearranged our entire kitchen. She moved all our dishes to different cabinets, threw away food she said was expired even though it wasn't, and installed some weird spice rack system that none of us wanted. When I asked her what she was doing, she said she was just trying to make the space more functional since she spends so much time there. I told Tyler that night that this couldn't continue. Either Jessica starts paying her share of rent and utilities, or she needs to stop practically living here. Tyler got defensive and said I was being unreasonable, that Jessica was going through a tough time and we should be more supportive. The next morning, I woke up to find a note taped to my bedroom door. It was from Jessica, and it said that she'd noticed I seemed stressed about the living situation, so she'd taken the liberty of deep cleaning my room while I was asleep. She'd gone through my personal belongings, reorganised my closet, and even made my bed with different sheets that she said were more aesthetically pleasing. I was furious. She'd been in my private space without permission, touched my personal things, and acted like she was doing me a favour. I confronted her immediately and told her she had no right to enter my room, let alone go through my stuff. Jessica started crying and said she was just trying to help, that she thought I'd appreciate having a clean, organised space. Tyler came running when he heard her crying and immediately started yelling at me for making his girlfriend upset. I told Tyler that Jessica had crossed a major line and that I wanted her out of the house immediately. Tyler said I was overreacting and that Jessica was just trying to be nice. He said if I couldn't handle living with his girlfriend, maybe I should be the one to move out. That's when I snapped. I told Tyler that Jessica doesn't pay rent, doesn't contribute anything, and has been treating our shared space like her personal property for months. I said that none of us signed up to have a fifth roommate, especially one who thinks she can just go into our private rooms whenever she feels like it. Tyler said I was being cruel and that Jessica was practically family now. He said that if we couldn't accept her, then he'd have to reconsider living here too, but he wasn't going to choose between us and her. I talked to my other two roommates, and they both agreed that the situation had gotten out of hand. We decided to give Tyler an ultimatum. Either Jessica starts paying her fair share and respects our boundaries, or both of them need to find somewhere else to live. When we presented this to Tyler, he accused us of ganging up on him and his girlfriend. Jessica started sobbing and said we were being mean to her because we didn't like her, which wasn't true. We just wanted her to respect our space and contribute if she was going to live here. Tyler said we were all heartless and that real friends would be more understanding. He packed his stuff that same day and moved out with Jessica, but not before Jessica left another note, saying that she forgave us for being so unwelcoming and that she hoped we'd learn to be more open-hearted in the future. Now Tyler isn't speaking to any of us, and he's been telling mutual friends that we kicked him out because we were jealous of his relationship. Jessica has been posting on social media about how some people are too selfish to help others in need, and how grateful she is to have someone like Tyler who stands up for her. I feel bad that we lost a friend, but I also don't think we were wrong to expect basic respect and financial contribution from someone who was essentially living in our house. That story's over. This woman moved in without permission, contributed nothing for 4 months, then had the nerve to redecorate their kitchen and rifle through someone's private space. Tyler choosing his freeloading girlfriend over basic roommate etiquette shows exactly where his priorities lie. Sometimes you have to cut people loose when they refuse to respect the most basic boundaries. Here's one that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about wedding etiquette. I got married 3 months ago to my now husband David. We had a small ceremony with about 60 people, mostly family and close friends. We saved for 2 years to afford this wedding, and while it wasn't extravagant, it was exactly what we wanted. My cousin Amanda was invited along with her husband and their 2 kids, ages 8 and 11. Amanda and I aren't super close, but we're family, and I wanted her there. What I didn't expect was for her to treat my wedding like a free babysitting service. The problems started during the ceremony itself. Amanda's kids were running around, talking loudly, and at one point her 8-year-old actually walked up to the altar during our vows to ask his mum if he could have a snack. Amanda just waved him away instead of getting up to handle the situation. During the reception, things got worse. The kids were climbing on chairs, grabbing food off other people's plates, and running between tables while the servers were trying to work. Other guests were clearly annoyed, but Amanda was too busy drinking and socialising to pay attention to what her children were doing. The breaking point came during our first dance. We'd hired a photographer specifically to capture this moment, and it was really important to us. Right in the middle of the song, Amanda's 11-year-old ran onto the dance floor and started doing some kind of TikTok dance routine, completely interrupting our moment. The photographer missed the shot because he was trying to figure out what was happening. Our beautiful first dance turned into this chaotic scene, with a kid flailing around in the background while Amanda laughed and filmed it on her phone like it was the cutest thing in the world. I was heartbroken. This was supposed to be one of the most special moments of our wedding day, and it was ruined. David tried to restart the dance, but the moment was gone and everyone was distracted. After the dance, I pulled Amanda aside and asked her to please keep her kids under control for the rest of the evening. I tried to be polite about it, but I was honestly pretty upset. Amanda immediately got defensive. She said her kids were just being kids and that I was being uptight. She said that weddings should be fun for everyone, including children, and that I was being selfish for expecting her to control every little thing they did. I explained that while I wanted kids to have fun, her children had been disruptive throughout the entire event and had just interrupted one of the most important moments of my wedding day. I asked if she could maybe take them outside for a few minutes to burn off some energy, or at least stay closer to them to prevent more incidents. Amanda rolled her eyes and said I was being bridezilla-ish and that I needed to relax. She said that if I didn't want kids at my wedding, I shouldn't have invited families. She told me that her kids were more important to her than my perfect wedding photos, and that I was being ridiculous for making a big deal out of it. The rest of the reception was tense. Amanda made a point of letting her kids do whatever they wanted, almost like she was proving a point. They knocked over a centerpiece, spilled juice on their fancy clothes, and continued to run around, despite other guests asking them to slow down. During the cake cutting, her 8-year-old tried to grab a piece directly off the cake before we'd even made the first cut. When David gently redirected him, Amanda snapped that we were being mean to her child, and that he was just excited. After the wedding, Amanda posted photos on Facebook of her kids at the reception with captions about how much fun they had and how great it was to have a family-friendly celebration. She made several comments about how some people take weddings too seriously and forget that it's supposed to be about bringing families together. Several family members have reached out to me since then. Some agreed that Amanda's kids were out of control and that she should have managed them better. Others said that I was being too harsh and that kids will be kids, especially at family events. My grandmother called me last week and said that Amanda was hurt by how I treated her at the wedding. She said that Amanda felt like I embarrassed her in front of the family and that I should apologize for making her feel unwelcome. I'm torn because I don't want family drama, but I also feel like Amanda completely disrespected my wedding day. I spent 2 years planning and saving for this event, and her lack of parenting turned several important moments into chaos. David is on my side and thinks Amanda was completely out of line, but he also thinks I should just let it go to keep peace in the family. He says the wedding is over and we can't change what happened, so there's no point in continuing to be upset about it. But I can't let it go. Every time I look at our wedding photos and see her kids in the background of what should have been intimate moments, I get angry all over again. Our first dance photo has her son's elbow in the corner because he was mid-dance move when the photographer finally got a shot. I feel like Amanda owes me an apology, not the other way around. But I'm starting to wonder if I'm being too unforgiving about the whole thing. That story is over. A child literally interrupting your first dance at your own wedding is not kids being kids, it's parents refusing to parent. Amanda turned what should have been a beautiful family celebration into her personal playground, while expecting everyone else to just deal with the chaos. The fact that she's now playing victim and expecting an apology after ruining multiple special moments is the cherry on top of this disaster Sunday. Some people really think the world revolves around them and their offspring. Let's dive into something that shows just how far some people will go to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. I'm 27 and I work as a manager at a mid-sized retail store. It's not glamorous work, but I've been there for 5 years and I've worked my way up from cashier to assistant manager to store manager. I take my job seriously and I try to treat all my employees fairly. About 8 months ago, we hired a new employee named Kevin. He's 19, this was his first real job, and at first he seemed eager to learn and work hard. I spent extra time training him, making sure he understood all our procedures and trying to help him succeed. But after about a month, Kevin's performance started declining rapidly. He was constantly late, sometimes by 30 or 40 minutes. He'd call in sick at least once a week, usually with suspicious timing like right before busy weekends or after he'd posted party photos on social media the night before. When Kevin was at work, he spent most of his time on his phone, even when there were customers waiting. He'd disappear for extended bathroom breaks, leave his register to chat with co-workers, and generally act like showing up was enough effort for the day. I tried talking to him multiple times, I explained that punctuality was important, that customers needed to be the priority, and that excessive phone use wasn't acceptable during work hours. Kevin would nod and agree, promise to do better, and then continue with the same behaviour. After about 4 months of this, I had to start writing him up, first for tardiness, then for excessive absences, then for poor customer service, after a customer complained that Kevin was texting while ringing up their purchase and didn't say a single word to them during the entire transaction. Each time I wrote Kevin up, his mother would call the store. She'd demand to speak to me and then launch into these long speeches about how Kevin was a good kid who was just adjusting to the working world. She'd make excuses for every single issue, blaming everything from traffic to his sleep schedule to stress from learning a new job. The first few times she called, I tried to be understanding. I explained that while I appreciated her concern for her son, Kevin needed to take responsibility for his own performance and that the standards applied to all employees equally. But Kevin's mum, Patricia, wasn't interested in hearing that. She started calling me almost weekly, sometimes multiple times per week, to complain about how I was treating her son. She'd say that I was being too hard on him, that I had unrealistic expectations, and that I was probably discriminating against him because he was young. The situation came to a head about 2 months ago. Kevin was scheduled to work a Saturday morning shift, which started at 8 a.m. At 8:30, we still hadn't heard from him, and he wasn't answering his phone. We were short-staffed and had a line of customers waiting. Kevin finally showed up at 9:45, nearly 2 hours late, with no explanation other than he overslept. This was his 6th unexcused late arrival in 3 weeks, and I'd already told him that another incident would result in termination. I called Kevin into the office and explained that I had to let him go. I went through all the documentation, showed him the pattern of tardiness and absences, and explained that we'd given him multiple chances to improve his performance. Kevin seemed shocked, like he genuinely didn't understand why this was happening. He said that everyone oversleeps sometimes and that I was being unfair. He asked for another chance, promised he'd do better, but I explained that we'd already had this conversation many times and nothing had changed. Within an hour of Kevin leaving, Patricia called the store screaming. She accused me of firing her son unfairly, said that I'd been targeting him from the beginning, and demanded that I give him his job back immediately. I calmly explained the situation, went through the documentation, and told her that Kevin had been given multiple warnings and opportunities to improve. Patricia said that didn't matter, that Kevin was still learning, and that I should have been more patient with him. Then Patricia said something that made my jaw drop. She said that it was partially my fault that Kevin had performance issues because I hadn't been supportive enough as a manager. She said that if I'd been a better leader, Kevin wouldn't have struggled so much, and that firing him proved I wasn't qualified to manage young employees. She actually blamed me for her son's chronic lateness, saying that maybe if I'd made the job more engaging and fun, Kevin would have been more motivated to show up on time. She said that good managers inspire their employees to succeed, and since Kevin didn't succeed, I must be a bad manager. Patricia then threatened to leave negative reviews about the store online, saying that we discriminate against young workers and that I was an abusive manager who created hostile work environments. She said she was going to contact corporate and file complaints until I was fired. Over the next week, Patricia followed through on her threats. She left 1-star reviews on every platform she could find, describing me as a bully who unfairly targeted her son. She called corporate multiple times, filed complaints with the Better Business Bureau, and even contacted our district manager to demand that I be investigated. In her complaints, Patricia painted Kevin as a model employee who was eager to learn, but was sabotaged by an incompetent manager. She claimed that I never properly trained him, that I set him up to fail, and that I fired him because I didn't like young people. Fortunately, I had documented everything thoroughly. Corporate reviewed all the write-ups, the attendance records, and even pulled security footage that showed Kevin on his phone during work hours. They concluded that the termination was justified and that I'd actually been more patient than most managers would have been. But Patricia didn't stop there. She started showing up at the store, not to shop, but to stand outside and tell other customers about how unfairly her son had been treated. She'd approach people in the parking lot and launch into this whole story about workplace discrimination and abusive management. Last week, Patricia brought Kevin with her for one of these parking lot campaigns. I watched through the window as she pointed at the store and gestured dramatically while Kevin stood there looking embarrassed. A few customers actually turned around and left instead of dealing with whatever drama was happening outside. I finally had to call mall security and ask them to handle the situation. Patricia was asked to leave the property and was told that if she continued to harass customers, she'd be banned from the entire mall. The whole thing has been exhausting and honestly pretty disturbing. I've managed dozens of employees over the years, including many young people who are just starting their first jobs. Most of them, even the ones who struggled initially, eventually learned to meet basic workplace expectations, or at least recognised when they weren't cutting it. But Patricia has turned her son's firing into this crusade where everyone else is to blame except Kevin. She's convinced that he was a perfect employee who was victimised by an unfair system, and she's willing to harass customers and damage a business to prove her point. The saddest part is that Kevin might have actually learned something valuable from this experience about responsibility and workplace expectations. Instead, his mother has taught him that when things don't go his way, the solution is to blame everyone else and make as much noise as possible until someone gives in. That story is over. This is helicopter parenting taken to its most toxic extreme. And honestly, Patricia has done more damage to Kevin's future than any manager ever could. Instead of teaching her son that actions have consequences and that improvement requires effort, she's created a monster who will blame everyone else for his failures for the rest of his life. The fact that she's literally harassing customers in parking lots to defend her chronically late phone-obsessed son shows just how far some parents will go to avoid admitting their kid isn't perfect. Kevin's going to struggle in every job he ever has because mommy taught him that showing up 2 hours late is everyone else's fault. Alright, if you've made it this far into this chaos, I have to assume you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe if you want more of these wild stories because, trust me, the internet never runs out of people willing to share their most unhinged family situations with strangers. I'll be back with more stories that'll make you grateful for your own relatively normal problems. And speaking of parents who've completely lost the plot, here's one that had me questioning whether some people should be allowed to reproduce. I'm 26 and I work at a local gym as a personal trainer. It's a pretty standard job, nothing too crazy, but I love helping people reach their fitness goals and stay healthy. The gym has a strict policy about children under 16 not being allowed in the workout areas for safety and insurance reasons. There are signs everywhere. It's clearly stated in the membership agreement, and we have a kids area with supervised activities during certain hours. Last Tuesday, I was working with a client when I noticed this woman had brought her twin boys, probably around 10 years old, into the free weight section. They were running around between the equipment, picking up dumbbells they could barely lift, and generally creating a safety hazard. I approached the woman politely and explained that children aren't allowed in this area of the gym. I offered to show her to the family zone where her kids could play safely while she worked out nearby. The woman, who I later learned was named Brenda, immediately got hostile. She said her boys were mature for their age and that they knew how to behave around gym equipment. She claimed they'd been coming to gyms with her since they were babies and had never caused any problems. I explained that it wasn't about their behaviour, it was a safety and liability issue. The equipment is designed for adults, and having children in this area puts everyone at risk. I mentioned that we had great supervised activities for kids their age just down the hall. Brenda rolled her eyes and said I was being ridiculous. She said her boys were athletes, that they played Little League and soccer, so they understood sports equipment better than most adults. She refused to move them to the kids area, saying it was beneath them and that they'd be bored with baby activities. I tried explaining the policy again, but Brenda cut me off. She said that, as a paying member, she had the right to bring her children anywhere in the facility she wanted. She claimed that discriminating against her kids based on age was illegal and that she'd sue the gym if we tried to force them to leave. At this point, other gym members were starting to complain. One elderly man nearly tripped over one of the boys who was crawling under a bench press. A woman doing squats had to stop mid-set because the kids were running circles around her, and she was afraid of accidentally hitting them. I called over my supervisor, Mark, to help handle the situation. Mark explained the policy again and offered several alternatives. The supervised kids area, the indoor track where families could walk together, or coming back during family swim time. When the pool area was open to all ages, Brenda lost it completely. She started screaming that we were discriminating against her family, that her boys had every right to be there, and that she was going to report us to corporate for harassment. She said we were probably just jealous that her kids were in better shape than most of the adults in the gym. The boys, meanwhile, had found the cable machine and were trying to use it like a jungle gym. One of them had wrapped the cable around his waist and was attempting to do some kind of weird spinning move while his brother pulled on the other end. Mark immediately went over to stop them before someone got seriously hurt, and that's when Brenda really exploded. She accused Mark of assaulting her children and threatened to call the police. She started filming everything on her phone, narrating loudly about how the gym staff was attacking innocent kids. By this point, half the gym had stopped working out to watch this spectacle. Brenda was screaming, her kids were crying because they'd been told to stop playing, and other members were starting to leave because the environment had become so chaotic. Mark asked Brenda to either move her children to an appropriate area or leave the gym entirely. Brenda said she wasn't going anywhere and that we'd have to physically remove her family if we wanted them gone. So Mark called the police. While we waited for the officers to arrive, Brenda spent the time calling everyone she could think of. She called corporate, she called the local news station, she even called the mayor's office to complain about discrimination at our gym. The whole time she was loudly telling her kids that the mean gym people were trying to hurt them because they were jealous of their athletic abilities. When the police arrived, they listened to both sides of the story. The officer looked at the clear signage about age restrictions, reviewed our membership policies, and calmly explained to Brenda that businesses have the right to establish safety rules for their facilities. Brenda demanded to speak to the officer's supervisor, claiming that he was taking the gym's side because we'd probably bribed him. She said this was a conspiracy against families and that she was going to expose the corruption in our local police department. The officer gave Brenda a choice: follow the gym's rules or be escorted off the property for trespassing. Brenda chose to leave, but not before announcing loudly that she was going to sue everyone involved and that we'd all regret treating her family so poorly. As she was gathering her things, Brenda told her kids that this was an example of how unfair the world could be, and that sometimes bad people try to stop good people from achieving their dreams. She said that the gym staff were bullies who picked on children because we couldn't handle competition. The boys seemed confused more than anything else. One of them asked why they couldn't just play in the kids' area, like the nice man suggested, and Brenda snapped that they were too advanced for baby games and shouldn't have to lower themselves to that level. Before leaving, Brenda made sure to tell every member she passed that the gym was unsafe for families and that the staff would kick out anyone who didn't fit their perfect image. She handed out her business card and asked people to contact her if they'd witnessed the discrimination she'd experienced. The next day, Brenda posted a lengthy review on every platform imaginable. She claimed that the gym deliberately targets families, that the staff are untrained and aggressive, and that they physically threatened her children for no reason. She posted photos of her boys looking sad and said they were traumatized by the experience. She also started a Facebook group called Families Against Gym Discrimination and invited everyone she knew to share their own stories of unfair treatment at fitness facilities. The group has 3 members: Brenda, her mother, and someone who appears to be a spam bot. Corporate did investigate the incident, reviewed the security footage, and spoke with the officer who responded. They concluded that all staff members followed proper procedures and that the gym's safety policies were clearly communicated and legally sound. But Brenda wasn't satisfied with that outcome. She's now threatening to organise protests outside the gym and has been calling local news stations trying to get them to cover what she calls the biggest discrimination scandal in our city's history. Last I heard, she was trying to get her boys enrolled in some kind of child advocacy programme so they could speak publicly about their traumatic experience of being asked to follow basic safety rules. The whole thing has been surreal. We deal with difficult members sometimes, but I've never seen someone turn a simple safety policy into a constitutional crisis. The worst part is that those kids are learning that throwing tantrums and playing victim is the appropriate response when you don't get your way. That story is over. This woman turned a basic safety rule into her personal civil rights movement and traumatized her own children in the process, teaching kids that rules don't apply to them and that throwing public tantrums will get them what they want is setting them up for a lifetime of disappointment. The fact that she's now trying to turn her sons into poster children for her imaginary discrimination case is just the perfect ending to this train wreck. Some people really think the entire world should rearrange itself around their convenience. Here's something that'll restore a tiny bit of your faith in karma, even if it took way too long to kick in. I'm 29 and I've been working at the same marketing company for about 6 years. It's a decent place to work, good benefits, reasonable hours, and most of my co-workers are pretty cool. About 3 years ago, we hired this guy named Brandon, who seemed normal enough at first, but quickly revealed himself to be one of those people who takes credit for everyone else's work. It started small. Brandon would jump into conversations about projects he had nothing to do with and start using phrases like, "when we developed that strategy," or "our campaign really succeeded because of the approach we took." At first I thought maybe he was just trying to sound like a team player, but it became clear that he was deliberately trying to associate himself with successful projects. The real problems started when Brandon began presenting other people's ideas as his own in meetings. I'd spend days developing a concept, share it with the team for feedback, and then watch Brandon present it to our boss the next week, like he'd come up with it himself. When I tried to speak up, Brandon would say something like, "Oh right, you helped with the research on that," or "thanks for your input on my idea." It was infuriating, but Brandon was really good at making it seem like I was being petty or territorial if I pushed back too hard. He had this way of acknowledging that other people contributed while still positioning himself as the mastermind behind everything. The worst incident happened about 18 months ago. I'd been working on a major campaign for one of our biggest clients for nearly 3 months. It was a complete overhaul of their branding strategy, and I'd put in countless hours researching their market, developing concepts, and creating presentations. The night before the big client meeting, Brandon somehow got access to my files and spent the evening creating his own version of my presentation. When we walked into the meeting the next morning, Brandon immediately launched into his pitch, using all of my research, my concepts, and even some of my exact wording. I was so shocked that I just sat there for the first few minutes. By the time I tried to say something, Brandon had already established himself as the project lead and was fielding all the client's questions with information I'd gathered. The client loved the campaign and specifically praised Brandon for his innovative thinking and thorough research. Brandon graciously accepted all the credit and even threw in a comment about how he'd been developing these concepts for months. After the meeting, I confronted Brandon privately. I told him that he'd stolen my work and that I was going to report the situation to our supervisor. Brandon looked me straight in the eye and said that ideas belong to the company, not to individuals, and that it was his job to present the best possible work to clients, regardless of who originally developed it. He said that if I was more assertive and better at presenting, maybe I wouldn't feel so threatened When other team members built on my contributions, he actually made it sound like he was doing me a favour by taking my mediocre work and turning it into something presentable. I did report it to our supervisor, but Brandon had covered his tracks well. He'd made sure to copy himself on emails about the project, had inserted himself into meetings I'd set up, and had documented his contributions in ways that made it look like we'd been collaborating all along. Our supervisor basically told us to work it out between ourselves and reminded us that collaboration was important for team success. Brandon got promoted 6 months later, partially based on the success of my campaign. For the next year and a half, Brandon continued his pattern of taking credit for other people's work. He'd swoop in at the last minute on projects, make minor tweaks, and then present the final version like he'd been leading the effort all along. Several other co-workers started complaining about the same thing, but Brandon was always careful to leave just enough ambiguity that management couldn't pin anything definitive on him. But here's where karma finally decided to show up fashionably late to the party. Last month, Brandon made a huge mistake. He stole a campaign concept from our newest team member, Riley, who's fresh out of college and wasn't familiar with Brandon's reputation yet. Riley had developed this brilliant social media strategy for a tech startup, complete with mock-ups, content calendars, and engagement projections. Brandon did his usual routine, taking Riley's work and presenting it as his own to both our internal team and the client. But what Brandon didn't know was that Riley had already submitted the exact same concept to a national marketing competition 3 weeks earlier. The client loved the presentation and immediately approved the campaign. Brandon was practically glowing as he accepted praise for his creativity and strategic thinking. He even made a comment about how this was the kind of innovative work that separated experienced marketers from entry-level employees. 2 weeks later, Riley's submission won first place in the national competition. The award announcement included detailed descriptions of the winning campaign, Riley's photo, and quotes about her creative process and strategic thinking. The client, who follows industry news closely, immediately recognized the campaign they'd just approved. They called our company asking why Brandon had presented award-winning work as his own original concept, and whether this was some kind of elaborate plagiarism situation. Our management team had to do some very awkward explaining. They reviewed all the documentation and discovered that Riley had indeed developed the entire concept independently, had submitted it to the competition before Brandon's presentation, and had timestamps proving she'd created all the materials weeks before Brandon claimed to have developed them. Brandon tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, claiming that he and Riley had collaborated so closely that he'd forgotten who had originated which ideas. But Riley had been meticulous about documenting her work, and she had emails, file histories, and even voice memos of her brainstorming sessions that proved she'd developed everything on her own. The client was furious about being presented with plagiarized work and threatened to terminate their contract with our company. Management had to offer significant concessions to keep the account, including removing Brandon from all future projects with that client. But the real kicker came when other team members started coming forward with their own evidence of Brandon's theft. It turned out that several people had been quietly documenting incidents over the past few years, and Riley's situation had given them the courage to speak up. Within a week, management had a file full of documented cases of Brandon taking credit for other people's work. There were email trails, project timelines, and even some recorded meetings where Brandon had claimed ownership of ideas that clearly belonged to others. Brandon was fired immediately, not just for the plagiarism, but for creating a pattern of unethical behaviour that had damaged team morale and put client relationships at risk. The best part? Riley's competition win brought a lot of positive attention to our company. She's been featured in several industry publications, and her success has actually brought in new clients who want to work with the award-winning creative team. Brandon, meanwhile, has been having trouble finding new employment. It turns out that word travels fast in our industry, and several companies have already heard about his reputation for taking credit for other people's work. He's been reaching out to former colleagues, asking for references, but most people aren't comfortable vouching for someone with his track record. Last week, I heard through the grapevine that Brandon had to take a job at a much smaller company for significantly less money than he was making here. Apparently, even that employer only hired him after he agreed to a probationary period with very strict oversight. Riley, on the other hand, got promoted to senior strategist and is now leading the team that Brandon used to be part of. She's implemented new processes for documenting project contributions and has created an environment where everyone gets proper credit for their work. Sometimes justice takes its sweet time, but when it finally shows up, it's absolutely beautiful to watch. That story is over. 3 years of watching this guy steal credit and climb the ladder on other people's backs, and karma finally delivered the most poetic justice possible. Getting caught plagiarizing work that had literally won a national award is the kind of spectacular downfall that restores your faith in the universe. Riley went from victim to award winner to team leader, while Brandon went from office predator to unemployed plagiarist. Sometimes the best revenge really is just letting people destroy themselves. I never thought I'd be the type of person to care about office politics, but here I am, 3 months after what I now call the Great Coffee Incident, still thinking about how a simple misunderstanding nearly destroyed my career. My name is David, I'm 31, and I work as a data analyst for a mid-sized consulting firm in Minneapolis. It's the kind of place where people wear khakis and button-downs, where the biggest excitement usually comes from someone bringing donuts on Friday morning. I've always been what you'd call a creature of habit. Every morning at exactly 8:47, I'd walk to the break room, pour myself a cup of coffee from the communal pot, add 2 sugars and a splash of cream, and head back to my desk. It was my routine, my small moment of peace before diving into spreadsheets and pivot tables. The trouble started on a Tuesday in March. I was running about 10 minutes behind schedule because of a delayed train, so instead of my usual 8:47 coffee run, I didn't make it to the break room until almost 9:15. The pot was nearly empty, just enough for maybe half a cup of that bitter overbrewed sludge that sits there all morning. But sitting next to the coffee maker was a French press, gleaming and full of what looked like perfectly brewed coffee. There was no name on it, no note, nothing to indicate it belonged to anyone specific. In my sleepy, caffeine-deprived state, I figured someone had made extra and left it for the team. It wouldn't be the first time. We had a pretty generous office culture when it came to sharing food and drinks, so I poured myself a cup. It was incredible, rich and smooth, with hints of chocolate and caramel. Best coffee I'd ever had in that office. I savoured every sip, feeling more human with each one. I even went back for a second cup around 10:30, thinking whoever made this deserved a thank you note. It wasn't until lunch that I learned the truth. I was heating up my sad desk salad in the microwave when Jennifer from accounting stormed into the break room, her face flushed with anger. Jennifer was one of those people who took everything personally, the type who'd send passive-aggressive emails about dirty dishes in the sink. She looked around frantically, then zeroed in on the empty French press sitting by the sink. Her voice, when she spoke, was shaking with rage. Someone drank my coffee, my entire French press of coffee that I brought from home. She was talking to nobody in particular, but loud enough for half the office to hear. My stomach dropped. That beautiful, perfect coffee that had made my morning, I'd stolen it, without thinking, without asking. I'd taken something that belonged to someone else. I felt like a complete idiot, but the damage was done. I walked over to Jennifer, ready to apologise and offer to replace her coffee, maybe even buy her a bag of whatever premium beans she'd used, but before I could say a word, she continued her rant. This is exactly the kind of selfish behaviour that's ruining this workplace. People think they can just take whatever they want without consequences. I opened my mouth to confess, but she kept going. I bet it was someone from the marketing department. They're always acting like they own the place, taking up meeting rooms, leaving messes everywhere. Probably that new guy, Alex. He has that entitled look about him. Alex was standing right there, holding his own coffee mug, looking completely bewildered. He'd only been with the company for 2 weeks, seemed like a nice enough guy, maybe a little eager to please, but hardly the office villain Jennifer was painting him as. "I didn't touch your coffee," Alex said quietly. "I don't even drink coffee. I'm more of a tea person." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "Right, sure you are. I suppose the French press just emptied itself." I watched this innocent man get accused of something I'd done, watched him try to defend himself, while Jennifer worked herself into an even bigger fury. The smart thing, the right thing, would have been to step forward and clear the air, but I froze. Maybe it was cowardice, maybe it was the fear of becoming Jennifer's target, but I just stood there, like a statue. The situation escalated quickly. Jennifer marched straight to our supervisor, Linda, and demanded an investigation into the coffee theft. Linda, to her credit, tried to treat it as the minor misunderstanding it should have been, but Jennifer wasn't having it. She wanted justice. She wanted accountability. She wanted someone to pay for her missing coffee. By the end of the week, there was a new policy posted in the break room. All personal food and beverages had to be labelled with names and dates. The communal coffee fund was suspended, pending a review of break room etiquette. Someone had to attend a mandatory workshop on workplace respect and property boundaries. Alex became increasingly isolated. People started avoiding him, not because they necessarily believed he was a coffee thief, but because being associated with drama in our office was social suicide. He'd eat lunch alone, work late to avoid the awkward small talk, and I could see the enthusiasm draining out of him day by day. Meanwhile, I was drowning in guilt. Every time I saw Alex sitting by himself, every time Jennifer made another snide comment about people who can't respect other people's property, I felt sick. I'd created this mess with my thoughtless mistake, and now an innocent person was paying the price. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Alex had been putting in extra hours, trying to prove himself, trying to show that he was a team player, despite the coffee incident. He'd volunteered for every project, stayed late to help with urgent deadlines, and generally bent over backward to rehabilitate his reputation. But Jennifer wasn't satisfied. During a team meeting, she brought up the coffee situation again, suggesting that maybe people who couldn't be trusted with small things shouldn't be trusted with important client work. It was a direct attack on Alex's competence and character, and I watched him shrink in his chair as she spoke. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather, who used to tell me that a man's character isn't measured by his mistakes, but by how he handles them. I'd made a mistake, that was human, but letting someone else suffer for it, that was something else entirely. The next morning, I got to the office early and asked Linda if I could speak with her privately. I told her everything, from my delayed train to my assumption about the communal coffee, to my cowardice in not speaking up sooner. I expected anger, disappointment, maybe even disciplinary action. Instead, Linda just sighed. "You know, I figured it was something like this. Jennifer has a tendency to blow things out of proportion, and Alex never struck me as the type to steal coffee. I was hoping whoever really did it would come forward eventually." She called a brief team meeting that afternoon. I stood in front of my colleagues and confessed to the great coffee incident of March. I apologized to Jennifer for taking her coffee without permission, and I apologized to Alex for letting him take the blame for something he didn't do. Jennifer's reaction was interesting. Instead of the vindication I expected her to feel, she seemed almost disappointed that the mystery was solved so simply. She'd built up this elaborate narrative of workplace theft and disrespect, and the reality was just a tired guy who made an honest mistake. Alex, on the other hand, was gracious beyond belief. He thanked me for coming forward and said he understood how these things could happen. He didn't seem angry, just relieved that the cloud hanging over him was finally lifting. The aftermath was surprisingly positive. The team seemed to respect that I'd eventually done the right thing, even if it took me longer than it should have. Jennifer and I never became friends, but the tension eased. Alex settled into his role and became one of the most reliable people on our team. I learned something important about myself during those weeks of watching an innocent person suffer for my mistake. I learned that small acts of cowardice can have big consequences, that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in it. I also learned that it's never too late to do the right thing, even when it's uncomfortable. These days, I still drink coffee every morning at 8:47. But now I always check if there's a name on anything before I pour myself a cup. And when I make mistakes, which I still do regularly, I try to own them quickly instead of letting them fester into something bigger and more harmful. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the smallest incidents. And sometimes being a good person means admitting when you've been a bad one. That's the end of that story. It's wild how something as simple as coffee can spiral into such workplace drama, but I respect that he eventually came clean. It takes real courage to admit your mistakes, especially when someone else is already taking the heat. Now let me share another story that caught my attention. This one about family dynamics and the complicated nature of forgiveness. This next story deals with something we've all probably experienced in some form. That moment when you realise a friendship isn't what you thought it was. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 27 years old. For the past 8 years, I thought I had found my person in college. You know that friend who just gets you, who you can call at 2 a.m. when your world is falling apart, who celebrates your wins like they're her own. That was supposed to be Emma. We met during freshman orientation at State, bonding over our shared love of terrible reality TV and our mutual hatred of our dorm's broken air conditioning. By sophomore year, we were inseparable. We'd study together at the library until closing, take weekend trips to nearby cities, and spend hours talking about our dreams and fears and everything in between. Emma was the kind of friend who remembered the little things. She'd bring me soup when I was sick, send me funny memes during boring lectures, and always knew exactly what to say when I was stressed about exams or boys or family drama. I thought I was the same kind of friend to her. After graduation, we both ended up in Chicago, which felt like fate. Emma got a job at a marketing agency downtown, and I started working as a graphic designer for a small non-profit. We lived about 20 minutes apart and made it a point to see each other at least twice a week. Sunday brunch became our sacred tradition. For 6 years, this arrangement worked perfectly. We were each other's plus ones to weddings, each other's emergency contacts, each other's chosen family, in a city where we didn't have relatives nearby. When Emma's dad had his heart attack junior year, I was the first person she called. When I went through my brutal breakup with Jake, Emma showed up at my apartment with ice cream and tissues without me even asking. But looking back now, I can see the cracks that were always there. The subtle ways Emma made everything about herself. How she'd listen to my problems but somehow always steer the conversation back to her own issues. How she'd get weird and distant whenever something good happened to me, then bounce back to normal a few days later. I told myself these were just quirks, that all friendships have their rough patches. Emma was going through a lot with her job, her family, her on and off relationship with this guy, Trevor. I made excuses for her behaviour, because that's what good friends do, right? The real trouble started about 10 months ago, when I got promoted at work. It wasn't anything huge, just a step up to senior designer with a modest salary increase, but I was excited. I'd been working toward this for 3 years, putting in extra hours, taking on difficult projects, really proving myself. I called Emma right after my boss gave me the news, expecting her to be thrilled for me. Instead, her response was lukewarm, at best. "Oh, that's nice," she said, her voice flat. "I guess they finally noticed all that overtime you've been putting in." I brushed it off. Maybe she was having a bad day, maybe she was distracted. But when we met for brunch that Sunday, she barely acknowledged my promotion. Instead, she spent the entire meal complaining about her own job, how her boss didn't appreciate her, how she was definitely more qualified than her recently promoted co-worker. The pattern continued over the following weeks. Whenever I brought up anything positive happening in my life, Emma would either change the subject or find a way to diminish it. When I mentioned that I was finally able to afford a nicer apartment, she pointed out how expensive rent was getting, and how I'd probably struggle to keep up with the payments. When I talked about the cute guy I'd started dating, she immediately launched into a story about how all men are basically garbage. I started censoring myself around her, downplaying good news, avoiding topics that might trigger her negativity. It felt like walking on eggshells with someone who was supposed to be my closest friend. The breaking point came during my birthday dinner in September. I'd planned a small celebration at this Italian place we both loved, invited maybe 8 people total. Emma arrived an hour late, which wasn't unusual for her, but she seemed off from the moment she sat down. Throughout dinner she was checking her phone constantly, giving one-word answers to questions, generally acting like she'd rather be anywhere else. When the server brought out the cake I'd ordered for myself, Emma didn't even look up from her phone. But the real kicker came when my friend Lisa asked about my recent promotion and the new project I was heading up. I started explaining how excited I was about the creative direction we were taking, and Emma literally rolled her eyes and said, "God, do we have to talk about work? It's supposed to be a party." The table went quiet. Lisa looked confused and a little hurt on my behalf. I felt humiliated, like a child who'd been scolded for being too enthusiastic about something important to them. I didn't say anything in the moment because I didn't want to cause a scene at my own birthday dinner, but the rest of the evening felt tainted. Emma left early, claiming she had a headache, and barely said goodbye. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the evening, but also the past few months, and slowly began to see a pattern I'd been ignoring. Emma wasn't happy for me when good things happened. She wasn't supportive when I needed encouragement. She wasn't really being a friend at all. I decided to test my theory. Over the next few weeks, I paid closer attention to our interactions. When Emma complained about her job, I listened and offered advice and support like always. But when I shared my own news, good or bad, she'd either dismiss it or somehow make it about herself. The final confirmation came when I told her I'd been asked to speak at a design conference in Portland. It was a huge opportunity for me, something I'd dreamed about for years. Emma's response was immediate and cutting. "Well, I hope you don't embarrass yourself. Public speaking isn't really your thing, is it?" I stared at her across the coffee shop table, genuinely shocked. This was supposed to be my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone, and she was actively trying to undermine my confidence about something I was genuinely excited about. That's when I realized that Emma had never really been happy for me, not once in 8 years. She'd been there for the bad times because misery loves company, but she couldn't handle my successes because they highlighted what she felt was missing in her own life. I started pulling back gradually. I stopped initiating our hangouts, stopped calling her first when something happened, stopped treating her like the automatic +1 to everything in my life. Emma noticed, of course, but instead of asking what was wrong or trying to repair things, she just got angry. She started making passive-aggressive comments about how I'd changed since my promotion, how success had gone to my head, how I was becoming one of those people who forgot their friends. The irony was incredible. She was accusing me of the exact behaviour she'd been exhibiting for months. The end came during what turned out to be our last brunch together. Emma was complaining about feeling stuck in her life, and I offered some genuine advice about networking and maybe looking for new opportunities. She snapped at me, saying I couldn't possibly understand because everything just fell into my lap. I finally lost it. 8 years of friendship, 8 years of supporting her through every crisis and celebration, and she thought my success just fell into my lap. I told her exactly what I thought about her attitude, about how she'd been treating me, about how exhausting it was to have a friend who could only be happy when you were miserable. She accused me of being selfish and jealous of the attention she got from others. I pointed out that I'd been nothing but supportive, while she'd been actively discouraging about everything good in my life. The argument escalated quickly. Voices raised, other diners staring, the whole dramatic scene I'd been trying to avoid for months. Emma stormed out, leaving me with the check and a table full of cold food. I sat there for another 20 minutes, partly in shock, partly relieved that it was finally over. We haven't spoken since that day in November. I see her posts on social media occasionally, and she seems to be doing well, hanging out with other friends, posting the same kind of content she always did. Sometimes I wonder if she even misses our friendship, or if I was just a convenient emotional dumping ground for her. The hardest part has been accepting that our entire friendship might have been one-sided, that for 8 years I was giving emotional support and loyalty to someone who saw me as competition rather than a true friend, that all those memories I treasured, all those moments I thought we were genuinely connecting, might have meant something completely different to her. I've made new friends since then, people who celebrate my wins and support me through challenges, people who don't see my success as a threat to their own happiness. It's shown me what real friendship looks like, and honestly, it makes me a little sad for what I thought I had with Emma. I don't hate her. I think she's probably struggling with her own insecurities and using other people's failures to make herself feel better. But I've learned that you can't fix someone else's relationship with success and happiness. You can't make someone be genuinely happy for you if they're not capable of it. These days, I'm more careful about the energy I invest in relationships. I pay attention to how people react when good things happen to me, not just how they respond when I'm struggling. Because true friends should be able to celebrate your joy, not just comfort your pain. That friendship taught me a valuable lesson about recognizing when someone is in your life for the wrong reasons. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones secretly hoping we don't succeed, and learning to identify that dynamic early can save you years of emotional exhaustion. Now I surround myself with people who genuinely want to see me thrive, and the difference in my mental health and overall happiness has been remarkable. Sometimes losing a toxic friendship is actually the best thing that can happen to you. That story really hits different when you realize how many relationships in our lives might actually be one-sided like that. It takes real strength to walk away from someone you've invested years in, even when you know they're not truly supporting you. Here's another story that explores a completely different kind of relationship dynamic, one that shows how assumptions can completely derail our understanding of the people closest to us. I'm 34 years old, my name is Michael, and I've been married to my wife Lisa for 7 years. We have what most people would consider a pretty solid relationship. We communicate well, rarely fight, share similar values and life goals. But about 4 months ago, I discovered something that made me question everything I thought I knew about the woman I married. It started with small things I began noticing around the house. Lisa had always been organised, but lately she'd become almost obsessively so. Every surface was spotless, every item had its exact place, and she'd get visibly anxious if anything was out of order. She started making lists for everything, from grocery shopping to weekend chores, and would check items off with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to the task. At first, I attributed it to work stress. Lisa's job as an elementary school teacher had become increasingly demanding, with new curriculum requirements and administrative pressures. I figured she was just channeling her stress into controlling her home environment, which seemed like a pretty normal coping mechanism. But then I started noticing other changes. Lisa began going to bed much earlier than usual, sometimes as early as 8:30 p.m, claiming she was exhausted. She'd always been a social person, but she started declining invitations to hang out with friends, saying she just wanted to stay home and relax. Most concerning was how she'd react to unexpected changes in our routine. If I suggested going out to dinner instead of cooking at home, or if I invited friends over without much advance notice, Lisa would get this look of panic in her eyes. She'd agree to whatever I suggested, but I could see the stress it caused her. I tried talking to her about it several times, asking if everything was okay, if there was anything she wanted to discuss. Each time she'd give me a reassuring smile and say she was just tired, that the school year was taking more out of her than usual. She'd promised to relax more on the weekends, maybe take a vacation day here and there. The turning point came on a Saturday morning in late October. I'd gotten up early to go for a run, and when I came back, I found Lisa sitting at our kitchen table with her laptop open, typing furiously. She was so focused that she didn't even notice me come in. As I walked past her to get some water, I glanced at her screen and saw that she was working on what looked like lesson plans. But it was Saturday morning, and she'd already spent most of Friday evening preparing for the upcoming week. I couldn't understand why she was putting in so many extra hours. "Babe, you're working again?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "I thought we agreed you'd try to disconnect on weekends." Lisa jumped, quickly closing the laptop. "Oh, I was just finishing up a few things. I'm done now." But she looked guilty, like I'd caught her doing something wrong. That afternoon, while Lisa was grocery shopping, her laptop was still on the kitchen table. I told myself I was just going to close it and put it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, expecting to see teaching materials or school emails. Instead, I found document after document of what appeared to be creative writing. Stories, character sketches, detailed plot outlines. And they weren't just random scribblings, they were polished, professional-looking pieces. Some were complete short stories, others seemed to be chapters of a longer work. I was stunned. In 7 years of marriage, Lisa had never mentioned any interest in creative writing. She'd never talked about wanting to be a writer, never shared any creative projects with me. Yet here was evidence that she'd been working on what looked like a substantial body of work. I started reading one of the stories, and I was immediately struck by how good it was. The characters felt real and complex, the dialogue was natural, and the plot was engaging. This wasn't amateur writing. This was the work of someone with real talent and experience. As I continued reading, I found folders organized by genre: science fiction, romance, literary fiction, even some poetry. There were submission guidelines for literary magazines, rejection letters from publishers, and correspondence with what appeared to be other writers. Lisa had an entire secret creative life that I knew nothing about. When she came home from the store, I was still sitting at the table with her laptop open. She saw what I was looking at, and her face went completely pale. "I can explain," she said quietly, setting the grocery bags down on the counter. I looked at her, this woman I'd been married to for 7 years, and realized I felt like I was meeting a stranger. "How long have you been writing?" I asked. She sat down across from me, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "Since college, maybe even before that. I've always written, but I got more serious about it a few years ago." "A few years ago? Lisa, why didn't you tell me? Why keep this secret?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Because I was afraid you'd think it was silly, or impractical, or that you'd want me to choose between teaching and writing." I was hurt and confused. Had I ever given her reason to think I wouldn't support her creative interests? Had I somehow created an environment where she felt she couldn't share something so important with me? "Have you been published?" I asked, though based on what I'd seen, I suspected the answer was yes. She nodded. "A few short stories in literary magazines, nothing major, but it felt like progress." I sat there trying to process this information. My wife was a published writer, something she'd been working toward for years, and she'd never told me. She'd been celebrating these achievements alone, dealing with rejections alone, nurturing this entire part of herself in secret. Over the next few hours, Lisa opened up about her writing life. She told me about the online writing groups she participated in, the workshops she'd taken, the novel she'd been working on for the past 2 years. She explained that all those early bedtimes were actually late-night writing sessions. She'd been getting up at 4 a.m. to write for a few hours before getting ready for work. The obsessive organisation, the anxiety about routine changes, the reluctance to make social plans, it all made sense now. She'd been protecting her writing time, creating structure around this secret passion that required discipline and consistency. "I never meant to lie to you," she said through tears. "I just didn't know how to bring it up. At first it felt too personal to share. Then as time went on, It felt too weird to suddenly mention this huge part of my life that I'd never talked about before. Or, I understood her reasoning, but I was still hurt. Not by the writing itself, but by the secrecy. By the fact that she'd felt she couldn't trust me with something so important to her. By all the opportunities we'd missed to celebrate her successes together. We spent the rest of that weekend talking about her writing, about why she'd felt the need to hide it, about how we could better support each other's individual interests and goals. I read more of her work, and it was genuinely impressive. She had a unique voice and perspective that I'd never seen in our daily interactions. Lisa showed me rejection letters she'd received from prestigious literary magazines, and I could see how much each one had stung. She'd been dealing with the emotional roller coaster of the creative life completely alone, celebrating small victories and processing disappointments without the support of her partner. The experience forced both of us to examine our relationship more closely. Had I been so focused on our shared life that I'd neglected to nurture her individual identity? Had she been so afraid of judgment that she'd chosen isolation over vulnerability? We decided to make some changes. Lisa set up a proper writing space in our spare room, and we established boundaries around her writing time. I started reading more about the publishing industry so I could better understand the world she was navigating. She began sharing her work with me regularly, asking for feedback and letting me celebrate her successes. The transformation in our relationship has been remarkable. Lisa seems more confident, more herself, now that she doesn't have to compartmentalize such a huge part of her identity. I feel like I'm getting to know my wife all over again, discovering depths and talents I never knew existed. She's currently shopping a novel to agents, and while the process is stressful and full of uncertainty, we're facing it together this time. Whether she gets published or not, I'm proud of her dedication and talent. I'm also grateful for what this experience has taught us about the importance of maintaining individual identities within a marriage. Looking back, I realized that Lisa's secrecy wasn't really about not trusting me. It was about protecting something precious and fragile until she felt confident enough to share it. In a way, I understand why she kept it to herself initially. Creative work is so personal, so vulnerable, that sharing it feels like exposing your soul. But I've also learned that partnerships require radical honesty, even about the parts of ourselves we're still figuring out. By hiding her writing life, Lisa had been carrying a burden that should have been shared. By supporting each other's individual passions, we've actually strengthened our bond as a couple. These days, I love watching Lisa work on her stories, seeing the concentration on her face as she crafts sentences and develops characters. It's like witnessing magic happen. And knowing that I get to be part of this journey with her, even if I came into it later than I should have, feels like a privilege. Sometimes the people we think we know completely still have entire worlds inside them waiting to be discovered. What a beautiful story about how, even in the strongest relationships, we can still surprise each other. It's amazing how she built this entire creative life in secret, and honestly, it makes sense why she protected it for so long. Creative work is so vulnerable. If you're still here listening to these stories, it means you're probably finding that perfect sleepy headspace we were going for. Consider subscribing if these late-night story sessions are helping you unwind. There's always more where these came from. Now here's a story that really caught my attention about workplace dynamics and what happens when kindness gets taken advantage of. My name is Catherine, I'm 29, and I work as a marketing coordinator at a small tech startup in Austin. We're the kind of company that prides itself on being a family. You know the type: ping pong tables, free snacks, casual dress code, and everyone's supposed to be best friends. For the most part, I genuinely enjoyed the atmosphere there. My co-workers were smart, funny, and we all seemed to genuinely care about each other's well-being. About 8 months ago, we hired a new graphic designer named Tom. He was 24, fresh out of college, enthusiastic about everything, and honestly just seemed grateful to have landed his first real job in his field. Tom was the kind of person who'd volunteer for extra projects, stay late to help meet deadlines, and always brought homemade cookies to share on Fridays. From his first week, it was clear that Tom was struggling financially. His clothes were always clean, but obviously worn. He never joined us for lunch outings because he said he was trying to save money, and he'd get visibly stressed whenever anyone mentioned weekend plans that cost money. It wasn't hard to piece together that he was probably living paycheck to paycheck, maybe even less than that. I felt for him. I remembered what it was like being 24 and broke in an expensive city, trying to make it in a competitive field. So when Tom mentioned one day that his car had broken down and he couldn't afford to fix it, I offered to give him rides to and from work until he got it sorted out. He was incredibly grateful, almost embarrassingly so, and promised it would just be for a few days. Those few days turned into a few weeks. Tom's car situation seemed to get more complicated every time I asked about it. First, it was waiting for a part. Then the mechanic had to order something special. Then there was an issue with his insurance covering the repairs. I didn't mind at first. Tom lived only about 15 minutes out of my way, and he was always ready and waiting when I arrived, usually with a coffee for me as a thank you gesture. But gradually, the arrangement started expanding beyond just work rides. Tom would mention that he needed to stop by the grocery store. Could we swing by on the way home? He had a doctor's appointment that he couldn't reschedule. Could I possibly give him a ride there during lunch? His sister was visiting, and he wanted to show her around the city. Would it be too much trouble to drive them to a few places over the weekend? Each request came with profuse apologies and promises that this would be the last time, that his car would definitely be fixed soon. And honestly, I'm a people pleaser by nature. It felt good to help someone who was clearly struggling, and Tom was always so appreciative that it made me feel like I was doing something meaningful. The turning point came about 3 months into this arrangement. I was supposed to pick Tom up for work as usual, but when I arrived at his apartment complex, he wasn't waiting outside like normal. I texted him, no response, called him, went straight to voicemail. I waited for about 20 minutes, getting increasingly worried that something had happened to him. Finally, he came jogging out of his building, hair still wet from the shower, looking completely frazzled. He jumped in the car and immediately started apologizing, saying he'd overslept, his alarm didn't go off, he was so sorry for making me late. I was annoyed but tried to be understanding. Everyone oversleeps sometimes. But then it happened again the following week, and the week after that. Tom started treating me less like someone doing him a favour, and more like his personal chauffeur service. He'd text me with requests like, "Can you pick me up at 8:15 instead of 8:30 tomorrow? I have an early meeting," without asking if that worked for my schedule. He'd assume I was available for weekend errands and get genuinely confused when I said I had other plans. The final straw came on a Friday afternoon. Tom asked if I could drive him to run some errands after work. Nothing major, just a quick stop at the bank and maybe the pharmacy. I agreed, thinking it would take maybe an hour total. Instead, Tom directed me to stop after stop across the city. The bank, the pharmacy, a specialty electronics store where he spent 45 minutes comparing prices on headphones, a used bookstore where he browsed for another half hour, and finally, a restaurant where he'd arranged to meet some friends for dinner. When we pulled up to the restaurant, Tom thanked me cheerfully and started to get out of the car. I sat there for a moment, realizing that he expected me to just drive home alone while he enjoyed dinner with friends. I'd spent 3 hours on a Friday evening being his unpaid Uber driver, and he hadn't even thought to invite me to join them or ask if this was inconvenient for me. "Tom," I said before he could close the car door, "I need to talk to you about this arrangement we have." "Why, Rush?" He looked surprised, like he couldn't imagine what I might want to discuss. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "This car situation has been going on for months now. I don't mind helping you out, but it's starting to feel like I'm your personal driver rather than a co-worker doing you a favour." Tom's expression shifted from confusion to defensiveness. "I didn't realise you felt that way. I thought you were okay with helping me out." "I always say thank you." "You do say thank you," I agreed. "But Tom, I've been driving you around for 3 months. You've never offered to pay for gas. You've never suggested we take turns with something I might need help with. And you've started making requests like I'm obligated to say yes. He was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe he was finally understanding my perspective. Instead, he said, I can't believe you're making me feel guilty for accepting help that you offered. If it was such a problem, why didn't you say something sooner? I was stunned by how quickly he'd turned this around to make me the bad guy. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about boundaries. Look, I'm sorry if I took advantage, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't really think he had. But my car is almost fixed, and then this won't be an issue anymore. That was 4 months ago. Tom's car was never fixed because Tom never had a broken car. I found this out through a mutual friend who happened to live in Tom's apartment complex. Apparently, Tom had been parking his perfectly functional Honda Civic in the visitor spots instead of paying for a monthly parking pass and walking to the pickup spot where I'd been collecting him every morning. When I confronted him about this, Tom finally admitted the truth. His car worked fine, but he'd been struggling to afford gas and parking, and it seemed easier to accept rides than to figure out the logistics of driving himself. He'd been planning to tell me eventually, he said, but the longer it went on, the harder it became to come clean. I was furious not just about the lying, but about how he'd manipulated my kindness for months without any consideration for my time or my feelings. I told him the rides were over, effective immediately, and that I needed some space to process what had happened. The fallout at work was awkward. Tom seemed to expect that we'd just go back to normal after a few days, but I found it hard to trust him or want to spend time with him. He started making comments to other co-workers about how I'd abandoned him when he needed help, painting himself as the victim of my sudden change of heart. Eventually, our manager noticed the tension and asked if there was a problem between us. I explained the situation objectively, focusing on how it had affected my work schedule and my ability to stay late when needed. Tom was called in for a separate conversation, and while I don't know exactly what was said, his attitude toward me shifted after that. He never directly apologized for lying to me or for taking advantage of my generosity. Instead, he started being overly professional and distant, like I was the one who had wronged him. It was clear that he genuinely didn't understand why I was upset or why what he'd done was problematic. The experience taught me a lot about setting boundaries and recognizing when someone is taking advantage of your kindness. Tom wasn't malicious exactly, but he was selfish and immature. He saw my willingness to help as an opportunity to solve his problems without considering the cost to me or the dishonesty involved in his approach. I still help co-workers when they need it, but I'm more careful about ongoing commitments and more direct about my expectations. If someone needs a ride to work for a week while their car is in the shop, that's one thing. If someone wants me to be their permanent transportation solution while lying about their circumstances, that's something else entirely. Tom still works at our company, and we maintain a polite but distant professional relationship. He found other ways to get to work, which proves he was always capable of solving his transportation issues without my help. Sometimes I wonder if he ever understood why I was so hurt by his deception, or if he still thinks I was just being mean to someone who needed help. The whole experience reminded me that kindness without boundaries isn't really kindness at all. It's just enabling someone to avoid taking responsibility for their own problems while creating resentment on both sides. That story is absolutely infuriating. The audacity of lying about a broken car for months while using someone as a free taxi service is just wild. Some people really will take advantage of any kindness they can get their hands on. Here's our next story, and this one deals with a situation that's probably more common than we'd like to admit. What happens when you discover something about your partner that completely changes how you see them? I'm 26 years old, my name is Jordan, and I've been with my boyfriend Kevin for about 2.5 years. We moved in together 8 months ago, and for the most part, everything has been great. Kevin is funny, thoughtful, ambitious, and we share a lot of the same interests and values. Or at least, I thought we did until last month when I discovered something that's been eating at me ever since. Kevin works in sales for a medical device company, and he's really good at his job. He's consistently one of their top performers, makes excellent money, and genuinely seems to enjoy the work. He travels occasionally for conferences and client meetings, but nothing excessive. Maybe once or twice a month, usually just overnight trips to nearby cities. I work remotely as a content manager for a digital marketing agency, so I'm home most of the time. This arrangement has worked well for us because I can be flexible with my schedule, and Kevin doesn't have to worry about things like letting repair people in or receiving packages when he's traveling. About 6 weeks ago, Kevin had to go to a conference in Denver for 3 days. It was a big industry event that he'd been looking forward to, and he'd been preparing for weeks, putting together presentations and setting up meetings with potential clients. He left on a Wednesday morning, excited and optimistic about the business opportunities. The first 2 days went normally. Kevin would call me in the evenings to tell me about the sessions he'd attended, the people he'd met, how the conference was going. He sounded engaged and professional, exactly what I'd expect from someone at a work event. But on Friday, something felt off. Kevin called me around lunchtime, and he sounded different, not sick exactly, but tired and a little scattered. He said the conference was wrapping up earlier than expected, and he might be able to catch an earlier flight home. I was excited about the prospect of having him back for Friday night instead of Saturday morning. A few hours later, Kevin called again to say he'd managed to switch his flight and would be home by 8 p.m. I decided to surprise him by making his favourite dinner and picking up a bottle of wine. I wanted to hear all about the conference and celebrate what sounded like a successful trip. Kevin got home right on schedule, but something was immediately wrong. He looked exhausted, more than you'd expect from a few days of meetings and networking. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was messy, and he had this strange, almost guilty expression on his face. When I hugged him hello, I noticed he smelled different. Not bad exactly, but unfamiliar, like a perfume or lotion I didn't recognize mixed with cigarette smoke, which was weird because Kevin doesn't smoke, and usually avoids places where people are smoking. During dinner, Kevin was distracted and gave vague answers to my questions about the conference. When I asked about specific sessions or people he'd mentioned earlier, he seemed confused, like he couldn't quite remember what he'd told me. He kept checking his phone and seemed anxious in a way I'd never seen before. I chalked it up to travel exhaustion and maybe some post-conference social anxiety. Kevin can be introverted in large groups, so I figured he was just drained from 3 days of networking and small talk. But over the next few days, Kevin continued acting strange. He was jumpy when his phone rang, secretive about his emails, and seemed distracted during conversations. When I asked if everything was okay, he insisted he was just tired and stressed about follow-up work from the conference. The truth came out by accident 2 weeks later. I was doing laundry and found a receipt in Kevin's pants pocket from his Denver trip. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but something made me look closer. It was from a restaurant called Bella Vista, dated for Friday night, the night Kevin had supposedly caught an early flight home. I stared at that receipt for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Kevin had definitely been home by 8 p.m. on Friday. I remembered because we'd had dinner together and watched a movie, but according to this receipt, he'd been at a restaurant in Denver at 9:30 p.m. that same night. I confronted Kevin about the receipt that evening, trying to give him a chance to explain what seemed like an obvious mistake. Maybe the restaurant had printed the wrong date, or maybe it was from a different trip. Kevin's reaction told me everything I needed to know. His face went pale, then red, and he got that same guilty expression I'd noticed the night he came home. He stared at the receipt like it was evidence of a crime. "I can explain," he said, but then he didn't say anything for a long moment. I waited, my heart pounding, knowing that whatever explanation was coming would change everything between us. Finally, Kevin admitted that he hadn't come home Friday night. He'd stayed in Denver an extra day and flown back Saturday morning, then spent several hours at the airport and driving around before coming home Friday evening. "Why would you lie about that?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. Kevin broke down and told me the truth. He hadn't been at a medical device conference at all. He'd been at a gambling conference, learning about sports betting strategies and meeting with people who made their living from gambling. The business meetings he'd been so excited about were actually sessions on reading odds and managing betting bankrolls. I was completely blindsided. In 2.5 years together, Kevin had never shown any interest in gambling. He'd never mentioned sports betting, never talked about going to casinos, never even bought lottery tickets, as far as I knew. Yet apparently, he'd been living this entire secret life that I knew nothing about. As the truth came out over the following hours, I learned that Kevin had been gambling online for over a year. Not just occasionally, but regularly, sometimes daily. He'd been using a separate bank account that I didn't know about, funded by a portion of his sales commissions that he'd been hiding from me. The Denver trip wasn't his first gambling-related travel. He'd been to Las Vegas twice in the past year, telling me they were work trips. He'd been attending monthly poker games with a group of guys from work, claiming they were just casual team-building dinners. Kevin insisted that he wasn't addicted, that he was actually pretty good at it and had made money overall. He showed me spreadsheets tracking his wins and losses, detailed analyses of his betting strategies, even testimonials from other gamblers who considered him skilled. But as he talked, I realized that whether he was winning or losing wasn't really the point. The point was that he'd been lying to me about a major part of his life for over a year. He'd created elaborate cover stories, hidden financial accounts, and deceived me about his whereabouts and activities on a regular basis. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked. "If you enjoy it and you're good at it, why keep it secret?" Kevin said he knew I wouldn't understand, that I'd worry about him losing money or developing a gambling problem. He said he wanted to prove to himself that he could be successful at it before bringing me into that world. I tried to understand his perspective, but I kept coming back to the fundamental dishonesty. Kevin had looked me in the eye countless times and lied about where he was going, what he was doing, who he was with. He'd created an entire fictional version of his life to hide something he was passionate about. The worst part was realizing how many of our conversations had been built on lies. All those times he'd come home from work trips and told me about presentations he'd given or clients he'd met, none of it had been real. I'd been supportive and interested in this fictional career development, while he was actually pursuing something completely different. We've been trying to work through this for the past month, but I'm struggling with the trust issues. Kevin has been completely transparent since the truth came out, showing me his accounts, explaining his strategies, even inviting me to come with him to poker games. But I can't shake the feeling that if he could lie about this so convincingly for so long, what else might he be hiding? The gambling itself doesn't bother me as much as I thought it would. Kevin wasn't exaggerating when he said he was good at it. He's actually made a significant profit over the past year. It's clearly something he's passionate about and has studied seriously. In some ways, it's not that different from any other hobby that requires skill and strategy. But the deception has created a crack in our relationship that I don't know how to repair. Every time Kevin goes somewhere or tells me about his day, I find myself wondering if he's telling the truth or if this is another elaborate cover story. Kevin says he understands why I'm having trouble trusting him, and he's committed to being completely honest going forward. He's even suggested couples counselling to help us work through the trust issues. Part of me wants to try to rebuild what we had, because aside from this massive deception, our relationship has been really good. But part of me wonders if this is just who Kevin is, someone who compartmentalizes his life and creates fictional narratives when the truth seems inconvenient, someone who can look at the person he loves and lie convincingly about fundamental aspects of his life. I don't know if trust can be rebuilt after something like this, or if I'll always be waiting for the next revelation about who Kevin really is underneath the version of himself he shows me. The fact that he maintained such an elaborate lie for over a year makes me question everything I thought I knew about him, and I'm not sure how to move forward from that kind of fundamental uncertainty about your partner's character. Wow, that's such a complex situation. The gambling itself almost seems secondary to the fact that he built an entire fictional life and maintained it for over a year. That level of deception would shake anyone's foundation of trust. Let me share one more story with you before we wrap up tonight. This one is about family dynamics and the sometimes painful process of setting boundaries with people you love. My name is Rachel, I'm 32, and I'm the middle child in a family of 5 kids. Growing up, our house was controlled chaos, always someone needing a ride somewhere, always some drama or crisis that required all hands on deck, always the feeling that there wasn't quite enough attention or resources to go around. My parents did their best, but they were overwhelmed. Dad worked long hours as an electrician, and Mum was basically a single parent most of the time, trying to manage 5 kids ranging from my older brother Daniel, who was always getting in trouble, to my youngest sister Amy, who was born when I was 12 and required a lot of care and attention. As the middle child, I learned early that the best way to survive in our household was to be helpful and invisible. While Daniel was acting out and demanding attention through negative behaviour, and my younger siblings were getting attention just by virtue of being small and needy, I carved out my role as the responsible one, the helper, the kid who never caused problems. This dynamic followed me into adulthood, even after I moved out, got married and started my own life. I remained the family problem solver. When Daniel got arrested, I was the one who researched lawyers and helped navigate the legal system. When my parents couldn't afford to fix their car, I quietly lent them money. When Amy was struggling in high school, I was the one who helped her with college applications and drove her to campus visits. I told myself this was just what families do for each other, that I was lucky to be in a position to help when others needed it. My husband Jake was supportive, though he occasionally pointed out that my family seemed to have an unusual number of emergencies that required my immediate attention and often my financial assistance. The breaking point came 6 months ago during what should have been a celebration. Jake and I had been trying to have a baby for 3 years, going through fertility treatments, dealing with multiple miscarriages, and finally, we were 12 weeks pregnant with a healthy baby. We'd just had our first ultrasound and were ready to share the news with our families. I called my mum to tell her she was going to be a grandmother again, expecting tears of joy, excitement, maybe some questions about due dates and baby names. Instead, before I could even finish sharing my news, Mum interrupted me. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful, but I need to talk to you about something urgent. Daniel's in trouble again, and we need your help." I felt like I'd been slapped. I'd just shared the most important news of my life, something Jake and I had been hoping and praying for through years of disappointment, and my mother's response was to immediately redirect the conversation to my brother's latest crisis. "Mum," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I just told you I'm pregnant. Can we talk about Daniel after we talk about this?" "Of course, sweetie. I'm so happy for you," she said quickly, in a tone that suggested she was checking a box so we could move on to what she considered the real conversation. Now about Daniel. It turned out that Daniel, who was 34 years old and had been in and out of legal trouble for most of his adult life, had been arrested again. This time for driving under the influence, and because he had previous convictions, he was facing serious jail time. Mum wanted me to hire him a lawyer, help with bail money, and possibly let him stay with Jake and me while he got back on his feet. I listened to this request with a growing sense of disbelief. My mother had just brushed past my pregnancy announcement to ask me to financially and emotionally support my adult brother through another self-inflicted crisis. She was asking me to bring a person with addiction and legal problems into my home while I was pregnant, after years of fertility struggles. "Mum, I can't do that," I said. "Jake and I need to focus on our pregnancy and preparing for the baby. Daniel needs to handle this himself." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Then came the guilt trip I'd been receiving in various forms my entire life. "I can't believe you're abandoning your brother when he needs you most." "This is what family does, Rachel. We help each other. I thought I raised you better than this." That phrase, "I thought I raised you better than this," had been weaponized against me countless times over the years. Any time I tried to set boundaries or prioritize my own life, I'd been told I was selfish, that I was forgetting where I came from, that I wasn't living up to the family values I'd been taught. But this time, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the pregnancy hormones. Maybe it was years of accumulated resentment. Or maybe it was just the stark clarity of realizing that my mother cared more about my brother's latest crisis than about my long-awaited pregnancy. "Actually, Mum, you raised me to believe that I was responsible for everyone else's problems and that my own needs didn't matter. But that's not healthy, and it's not fair, and I'm done." I hung up the phone and immediately burst into tears. Jake held me while I sobbed, not just from the immediate hurt of my mother's reaction, but from the dawning realization of how dysfunctional my family dynamic had always been. Over the next few days, I received a barrage of calls and texts from various family members. My father called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart. My sister Amy texted to say she couldn't believe I was being so selfish when Daniel really needed help this time. Even my grandmother got involved, calling to remind me that family comes first and that I'd regret not helping my brother. The message was clear. I was the villain in this story. By refusing to drop everything and rescue Daniel from the consequences of his own actions, I was the one causing problems for the family. But something had shifted in me. For the first time in my life, I was seeing the pattern clearly. Daniel created crises, the family panicked, and I was expected to fix everything while my own life and needs were treated as secondary. This had been happening for decades, and I'd been so conditioned to accept it that I'd never questioned whether it was fair or healthy. I spent the next few weeks in therapy, talking through these family dynamics with a professional who helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't normal family closeness, but a form of emotional manipulation called parentification. I'd been trained from childhood to take responsibility for problems that weren't mine to solve. The hardest part was accepting that my family's love for me might be conditional on my willingness to continue playing this role. As long as I was the helpful, self-sacrificing daughter and sister, I was valued and appreciated. The moment I tried to set boundaries and prioritize my own life, I became the selfish one who was abandoning the family. I decided to maintain my boundaries, even though it meant accepting that my relationships with my family members might fundamentally change. I didn't hire Daniel a lawyer, I didn't contribute to his bail fund, and I didn't offer him a place to stay. Instead, I focused on my pregnancy, my marriage, and building a healthier life for the family Jake and I were creating. The consequences were swift and painful. My mother stopped calling me regularly. When I'd reach out to check in, our conversations were stilted and cold. She'd give me updates about everyone else in the family, but seemed to have little interest in how I was doing or how my pregnancy was progressing. My siblings' reactions varied. Amy initially took Mum's side, but after a few weeks, she called to apologise and said she was starting to see the pattern too. She admitted that she'd been feeling pressure to step into my old role as the family fixer, and she didn't want that responsibility either. My older brother Daniel, surprisingly, wasn't as angry as I'd expected. When he finally called me from jail, he actually apologised for the position I'd been put in. "I know this isn't your mess to clean up," he said. "I'm sorry Mum made you feel bad about not bailing me out again." It was the most mature conversation Daniel and I had ever had, and it gave me hope that maybe, eventually, we could have a healthier relationship based on mutual respect rather than one-sided rescue missions. Dad was caught in the middle, as usual. He understood why I'd set boundaries, but he was also dealing with Mum's disappointment and anger. He tried to play peacemaker, suggesting compromises that would appease everyone. But I'd finally learned that some situations don't have compromise solutions. The real test came when I was 7 months pregnant and went into preterm labour. I spent 3 days in the hospital on bed rest, scared and uncertain about whether our baby would be okay. Jake called my family to let them know what was happening, thinking that a medical emergency might bridge the gap that had formed between us. My dad and Amy came to visit, bringing flowers and genuine concern, but my mother's response was telling. She sent a text message saying she was sorry I was having complications and that she hoped everything would work out. A text message for her daughter, who was potentially losing a much-wanted baby after years of fertility struggles. That's when I realised that my mother's love had always been conditional on my compliance. When I was useful to her, when I was solving other people's problems and putting the family's needs above my own, she was warm and affectionate. But the moment I prioritised my own life and well-being, I became dispensable to her. It was a painful realisation, but also a liberating one. I stopped feeling guilty about my boundaries and started feeling grateful that I'd discovered this pattern before bringing my own child into it. My daughter was born healthy at 37 weeks, and she's now 6 months old and absolutely perfect. My mother has met her granddaughter exactly twice, both times for brief, awkward visits, where she seemed more interested in getting photos for social media than in actually bonding with the baby. Meanwhile, my relationships with Dad and Amy have actually improved. Without the constant drama of Daniel's crises and Mum's demands for family rescues, we've been able to have more genuine conversations about our lives, our hopes, our individual challenges. Amy has started setting her own boundaries with Mum, and Dad has begun to see how the family dynamic was unhealthy for everyone involved. Daniel got sober in jail and has been clean for 4 months now. He's working with a counsellor and taking responsibility for his actions in a way he never did before. Ironically, not rescuing him might have been the best thing I could have done for him, because it forced him to face the consequences of his choices and develop his own coping strategies. As for my relationship with my mother, I'm still hopeful that it can be repaired someday, but only if she's willing to accept that I'm an adult with my own family and my own priorities. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm also not closing the door completely. The experience taught me that sometimes loving your family means refusing to enable their dysfunction, even when that choice makes you the villain in their story. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining your mental health and creating space for healthy relationships to flourish. My daughter will grow up knowing that she's loved unconditionally, not because of what she can do for other people, but because of who she is. She'll learn that it's okay to have needs and boundaries, and that healthy families support each other without keeping score or demanding sacrifices that compromise. Our first story comes from a user who goes by Tired Night Shift, and it's titled, "I work security at a children's hospital, and something followed me home." I've been working night security at Riverside Children's Hospital for about 3 years now. It's not the most exciting job, but it pays well, and I get to help keep sick kids safe while they sleep. Most nights are pretty routine. Walk the halls, check the doors, make sure the emergency exits are secure. The worst thing I usually deal with is maybe a confused parent wandering around or a piece of equipment acting up. But about 2 weeks ago, something happened that I can't shake. I was doing my usual rounds around 2 a.m. when I heard crying coming from the pediatric oncology wing. Now this isn't unusual. Kids cry at night, especially when they're scared or in pain. But this crying was different. It was coming from room 237, which has been empty for the past month. I checked my clipboard. Yeah, room 237 was definitely vacant, scheduled for deep cleaning after the last patient was discharged. I figured maybe it was coming from the room next door. Sound travels weird in hospitals. But as I got closer, the crying got louder and more distinct. It was definitely coming from inside the empty room. I used my keycard to open the door. The room was completely dark except for the hallway lights spilling in behind me. The crying stopped immediately. I flipped on the lights and did a thorough check. Nothing. The room was completely empty. bed stripped, no medical equipment, nothing that could make noise. I was about to leave when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were small wet footprints on the floor. Child-sized footprints leading from where the bed would have been to the window that was on the 4th floor. I called it in to my supervisor, told him about the crying and the footprints. He came down to check it out with me. But by the time he arrived, the footprints had dried up. He told me I was probably just tired, that maybe there was a leak somewhere that I missed. I wanted to believe him. The next night, same thing, crying from room 237 at exactly 2:17 a.m. This time I was ready. I had my phone out recording as I approached the room. The crying was so clear on the recording, you can hear it plain as day. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sobbing like her heart was breaking. I opened the door again, and again the crying stopped instantly. But this time, something was different. The window was open. Not just unlocked, but wide open, with the curtains blowing in the wind. I know for a fact that window was locked when I checked it the night before, because I specifically tested all the windows in the empty rooms. I closed the window and locked it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned around, and that's when I saw her, just for a split second. In my peripheral vision, a little girl in a hospital gown standing in the corner of the room. When I turned my head to look directly at her, she was gone. This went on for 5 more nights, always the same time, always the same room, always the same crying. My supervisor started getting annoyed with my reports. He even had maintenance check the room for leaks, loose pipes, anything that could explain the sounds. They found nothing. On the 7th night, I decided I wasn't going to check the room. I was going to ignore the crying and continue my rounds. But at 2:17 a.m, instead of crying, I heard laughing. A little girl's laughter echoing through the halls. Not happy laughter, but the kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl, manic, almost hysterical. The laughter was moving. Starting from room 237, it began following me as I walked. I quickened my pace, but the laughter stayed right behind me. I could feel something small tugging at the bottom of my uniform shirt. When I looked down, there was nothing there, but the tugging continued. I made it to the security office and locked the door behind me. The laughter stopped. I sat there for the rest of my shift, watching the monitors, but I didn't see anything unusual on the cameras. When morning came, I was exhausted and shaken. But here's where it gets really bad. When I got home that morning, I found small muddy footprints on my apartment floor, the same size as the ones I'd seen in room 237. They led from my front door to my bedroom, then stopped at the foot of my bed. I live alone on the 3rd floor of my building. There's no way a child could have gotten into my apartment. I checked all the windows, all the locks, everything was secure. But those footprints were there, clear as day. That night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard it again. The crying, coming from my living room. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept out of my bedroom, but the apartment was empty. No footprints this time, nothing disturbed. But I could still hear the crying, faint but persistent. I haven't been back to work since. I called in sick for the past week, but I can't avoid it forever. The thing is, the crying hasn't stopped. Every night at 2:17 a.m. I hear her, sometimes from my living room, sometimes from the hallway outside my apartment, sometimes from right next to my bed. I did some research on room 237, found out that a 7-year-old girl named Lily passed away in that room about 6 months ago. Leukemia. According to the records, she died at 2:17 a.m. Her parents said she was terrified of being alone, that she would cry for hours if no one was sitting with her. I think she followed me home because she doesn't want to be alone anymore. I don't know what to do. I can't sleep, I can't work, and I'm starting to see her during the day now too. Just glimpses, but she's always there, always crying, always reaching out for someone to comfort her. If anyone has any advice, please help. I don't think she means to hurt me, but I can't live like this anymore. That's where the post ends, and honestly, I'm getting chills just reading it. The idea of a lonely spirit following you home because you're the only person who acknowledged her presence is both heartbreaking and terrifying. Children's hospitals are already emotionally heavy places, but add a supernatural element, and you've got a recipe for sleepless nights. The detail about the specific time of death matching when the crying occurs is what really sells this story for me. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the psychological impact of thinking you're being followed by a grieving child would be absolutely devastating. Our next story comes from someone called Midnight Drive Alone, and the title is Something Knocked on My Car Window at 3 a.m. on an empty highway. I drive a lot for work, sales rep for a medical supply company, which means I'm constantly on the road travelling between hospitals and clinics across 3 states. I've driven every back road, every highway, every shortcut you can imagine. After 5 years of this, I thought I'd seen everything. Last month, I was coming back from a late meeting in Columbus, Ohio. It had run way longer than expected, and by the time I hit the road, it was already past midnight. I had a 4-hour drive ahead of me, and I was exhausted. But I had an early morning appointment, so I couldn't afford to stop at a hotel. About 2 hours into the drive, I was on this stretch of highway that cuts through absolutely nothing. No towns, no gas stations, no rest stops for miles. Just farmland and forest on both sides. It's the kind of road where you might see another car, maybe once every 20 minutes if you're lucky. My gas light had been on for about 30 miles and I was starting to get nervous. My GPS said the next gas station was still 40 miles away. I was calculating in my head whether I could make it when my engine started making this weird knocking sound. Within minutes, the knocking got worse and my temperature gauge shot into the red. I had to pull over. There wasn't much of a shoulder, just enough room to get my car mostly off the roadway. I popped the hood and saw steam pouring out. Even in the dark, I could tell it was bad. I tried calling the AAA, but I had no cell service. The road was so remote that I hadn't seen a cell tower in hours. I was basically stranded in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m. with a dead car. I figured my best bet was to wait until morning when there might be more traffic. So I locked the doors, reclined my seat, and tried to get some sleep. The silence out there was complete. No traffic, no wind, not even crickets, just dead quiet. I must have dozed off because I was jolted awake by 3 slow, deliberate knocks on my driver's side window. Knock, knock, knock. My heart nearly exploded. I looked at the clock on my dashboard. 3:17 a.m. I slowly turned to look out the window, expecting to see maybe a state trooper or a good Samaritan who had stopped to help. There was nothing there, just darkness. I sat perfectly still for a few minutes listening. Maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe it was just the car settling or cooling down. But then I heard footsteps, slow, measured steps walking around my car, gravel crunching under what sounded like heavy boots. The footsteps stopped at my passenger window. 3 more knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I looked over, and again, nothing. But I could see my breath now, even though it hadn't been cold when I pulled over. The temperature inside my car had dropped dramatically. The footsteps continued around to the back of my car. I watched my mirrors, but I couldn't see anyone. Then they moved to the rear passenger window. 3 more knocks. By now, I was terrified. I fumbled for my phone, hoping maybe I had gotten some signal back, but still nothing. The footsteps completed their circuit around my car and stopped back at my driver's side window. This time, the knocks were different. Louder, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. I forced myself to look. Standing right outside my window was a figure, tall, maybe 6.5 feet, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned suit, but I couldn't see his face. Where his face should have been was just shadow, like the darkness was deeper there than anywhere else. He raised his hand and knocked again. Knock, knock, knock. Then he spoke. His voice was muffled by the glass, but I could hear him clearly. "You need help," he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't respond. Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to roll down that window, not to unlock that door, not to engage with whatever this thing was. "I can fix your car," he continued. "Just let me help you." The temperature in my car kept dropping. I could see ice forming on the inside of my windows. My breath was coming out in thick white clouds. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Him standing outside my window. Me frozen in terror inside my car. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. Finally, he spoke again. "You don't want my help?" There was something different in his voice now. Disappointed, maybe angry. I still didn't respond. I couldn't have even if I wanted to. I was paralyzed with fear. The figure stepped back from my window. "That's unfortunate," he said. Then he was gone. Not like he walked away, just gone. 1 second he was there. The next second the space outside my window was empty. The temperature in my car immediately started returning to normal. Within minutes, it was back to the mild spring night it had been when I first pulled over. I sat there until sunrise, too scared to move. When the sun came up, I got out and checked around my car. No footprints in the gravel, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Here's the weird part. I turned the key to see if maybe my car would start, just to try it. The engine turned over immediately. No knocking, no overheating, like nothing had ever been wrong with it. I drove straight to the nearest gas station and had a mechanic look at it. He couldn't find anything wrong. No leaks, no damage, nothing that would explain why it had overheated. I've driven that stretch of highway dozens of times since then, always during the day, but I'll never drive it at night again. And I've done some research on that area. Turns out there have been reports for decades of a tall figure in a suit approaching stranded motorists on that exact stretch of road. Most people who encounter him and refuse his help report that their car problems mysteriously resolve themselves. But there are a few reports from people who accepted his help. Their cars were found weeks later, abandoned on the side of the road. The drivers were never seen again. I think about that sometimes. What would have happened if I had rolled down my window, if I had let him help me? I'm glad I'll never know. Okay, that one legitimately gave me goosebumps. There's something so unsettling about being completely vulnerable and isolated, and then having something otherworldly offer help with strings attached. The detail about other people going missing after accepting help from this figure is what really seals the deal for me. It's like a modern version of those old cautionary tales about not accepting help from strangers, except the stranger might not even be human. The fact that the car magically fixed itself after refusing the help suggests this entity has power, but requires permission to use it in certain ways. The reports of people disappearing after accepting his help really drives home that classic horror trope. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do is say yes to a stranger offering assistance in the middle of nowhere. It's like a twisted version of a fairy tale, where the price of help is something you can never pay back. Our third story tonight comes from a user called Basement Apartment Life, and it's titled, "My downstairs neighbour has been dead for 3 weeks, but I still hear him walking around every night." I moved into this basement apartment about 6 months ago. It's not much to look at, pretty cramped, but the rent was cheap and it was in a decent neighbourhood. The building is old, maybe from the 1940s, and it's been converted into 4 units. I'm in the basement, there's a ground floor apartment and 2 more upstairs. My upstairs neighbour is Mrs. Chen. She's probably in her 70s and keeps to herself. The ground floor apartment has been empty since I moved in, and right above me, in what used to be the first floor, lives this guy named Harold. Or lived, I should say. Harold was probably in his 60s, retired, and he had this very specific routine. Every night at exactly 11:30 p.m, he would start pacing, back and forth across his living room, which was directly above my bedroom. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, like he was wearing work boots. It would go on for exactly 1 hour, then stop abruptly at 12:30 a.m. At first, it drove me crazy. I'm a light sleeper, and the old floorboards would creak with every step. I could track his exact path from what I figured was his kitchen, across the living room, to the window, then back, over and over. I thought about complaining, but honestly, the guy seemed harmless and 1 hour of noise wasn't the end of the world. I only met Harold face to face a few times. He was quiet, polite, always wore the same brown cardigan and work boots. He mentioned once that he'd worked construction his whole life, that he was used to being on his feet. I figured the pacing was just a habit from his working days, maybe helped him think or relax. 3 weeks ago, I came home from work to find an ambulance and a police car outside the building. Turns out Harold had died. Heart attack. Probably happened the day before. Mrs. Chen had called it in when she noticed his newspaper piling up and his mail overflowing. I felt bad about it. He seemed like a decent guy, just lonely. The landlord said Harold's family would come clean out the apartment in a few weeks, but for now, it would stay empty. Here's the thing though, that first night after Harold died, at exactly 11:30 p.m, the pacing started again. I sat up in bed, confused. The apartment was supposed to be empty. Maybe the landlord was up there checking things out, or maybe Harold's family had come by. But it was the same pattern. The same heavy footsteps in work boots. The same path from kitchen to window and back. It went on for exactly 1 hour and stopped at 12:30 a.m, just like always. The next morning I asked Mrs. Chen if she'd seen anyone go into Harold's apartment. She said no, that she'd been home all evening and hadn't heard anything. When I mentioned the footsteps, she got this weird look on her face and quickly changed the subject. The pacing has continued every night since then. Same time, same duration, same pattern. I've tried staying awake to listen more carefully, and I swear it sounds exactly like Harold's footsteps. The same weight, the same rhythm, even the same spots where the floorboards creak the loudest. Last week I got fed up and decided to investigate. I waited until the pacing started, then went upstairs and knocked on Harold's door. The footsteps stopped immediately. I tried the handle. Locked. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. Complete silence. I went back downstairs, and within 5 minutes, the pacing resumed, finished out the full hour like nothing had happened. I called the landlord and asked if anyone had keys to Harold's apartment besides him. He said no, that he was the only one with access and he hadn't been in the building in weeks. I mentioned the noises, and he got irritated, said I was probably hearing Mrs. Chen moving around upstairs and that grief can make people imagine things. But Mrs. Chen's apartment is on the 2nd floor. The footsteps are definitely coming from Harold's 1st floor unit. And besides, Mrs. Chen weighs maybe 90 pounds and shuffles when she walks. These footsteps are heavy, purposeful, exactly like Harold's were when he was alive. 2 nights ago, I decided to test something. At 11:25 p.m, I went upstairs and stood outside Harold's door. At exactly 11:30, I heard the footsteps start up inside the apartment. I put my hand on the door, and I could feel the vibrations through the wood with each step. I called out, "Harold, is that you?" The footsteps stopped for maybe 10 seconds, then resumed. I stayed there for the full hour, listening to someone or something pace back and forth in an apartment where a dead man used to live. When the footsteps stopped at 12:30, I heard something else. The sound of a door opening and closing inside the apartment, like someone going into a bedroom for the night. I'm writing this at 11:25 p.m. In 5 minutes, it's going to start again. I can feel it, this anticipation in the air, like the building itself is holding its breath, waiting. I don't think Harold realised he died. I think he's still up there, following the same routine he had for months, pacing in his living room from 11:30 to 12:30, then going to bed. Maybe he's restless. Maybe he's worried about something. Or maybe death is just another kind of insomnia. The thing that scares me most is that I'm starting to find it comforting. When 11:30 rolls around and those familiar footsteps start up, there's something almost reassuring about it, like Harold still keeping watch over the building, still maintaining his routine, even in death. I haven't told anyone else about this. Who would believe me? But I needed to write it down somewhere, just in case something happens to me, in case whatever's keeping Harold tied to this place decides it wants company. The footsteps are starting now, right on schedule. I guess some habits are stronger than death. That story hits different because it's not necessarily malevolent, just profoundly sad. The idea of someone being so locked into their routine that not even death can break them out of it is both tragic and terrifying. Harold doesn't seem to know he's gone, just continuing his nightly ritual like muscle memory. The fact that the narrator is starting to find comfort in it makes it even more unsettling, like maybe that's how these things spread. Next up, we have a story from Weekend Camping Trip that's titled "We Found a Tent in the Woods that wasn't there the day before, and someone was still inside." My buddies and I try to go camping at least once a month, nothing too extreme, just getting out of the city for a weekend, drinking some beers around a fire, that kind of thing. We have this spot we always go to, about 3 hours north of where we live. It's not an official campground, just a clearing in the woods near a small lake that we found a few years back. We've been going to this same spot for so long that we know every tree, every rock, every inch of the area. That's why what happened last weekend was so disturbing. There were 4 of us on this trip: me, Jake, Marcus and David. We got there Friday afternoon, set up our tents in our usual configuration around what we call the fire circle. We've got it down to a science at this point. Jake and I always set up on the east side, Marcus on the west, David on the south, and we leave the north side open facing the lake. Friday night was perfect. Clear skies, good fire, plenty of laughs. We stayed up until probably 2 a.m. before calling it a night. Saturday, we spent fishing and hiking. Came back to camp around dinner time. That's when David noticed it first. "Hey," he said, pointing toward the tree line. "Was that tent there yesterday?" We all looked where he was pointing. About 50 yards from our camp, just inside the tree line, on the opposite side of the clearing, there was a small green tent. Single person size, looked pretty new. I was sure it hadn't been there when we arrived. We always do a perimeter check when we set up camp, just to make sure we're not encroaching on anyone else's spot or leaving trash around. There was definitely no tent there Friday afternoon. "Maybe someone hiked in after dark," Jake suggested. "Didn't want to disturb us by setting up closer to our fire." That made sense. It's happened before. People finding our spot and camping nearby. Usually, they'll come over and introduce themselves, but some folks prefer to keep to themselves. We decided to give whoever it was their space. If they wanted to be social, they'd come over to our fire. We spent Saturday evening grilling burgers and telling stories, but we didn't see any signs of life from the green tent. No flashlight, no movement, nothing. Sunday morning, Jake was up first making coffee. He came back to his tent and woke the rest of us up with this weird look on his face. "Guys," he said quietly, "I think something's wrong with our neighbour." We all got up and looked toward the green tent. It was still there, zipped up tight, but there was this smell in the air, sweet and sickly, like meat that had been left out too long. "Maybe they're just sleeping in," David said, but he didn't sound convinced. "At 9 a.m, Jake replied. "And what about that smell?" We debated what to do for about 20 minutes. On one hand, we didn't want to intrude on someone's privacy. On the other hand, if someone was sick or hurt, we couldn't just ignore it. Finally, Marcus volunteered to go check it out. "I'll just call out to them, see if they respond," he said. We watched as he walked across the clearing toward the tent. When he got about 10 feet away, he stopped dead in his tracks and covered his nose with his shirt. "Oh God," he called back to us. "The smell is really bad over here." He approached the tent slowly and called out, "Hey, are you okay in there? We're camped across the clearing. Just wanted to make sure everything's all right." No response. He tried again, louder this time. "Hello, is anyone in there?" Still nothing. Marcus looked back at us, then reached out and gently shook the tent. There was definitely something inside. We could see the tent move and shift like there was weight in it. "I think someone's in there, but they're not responding," Marcus called out. "What should I do?" Jake was already on his phone trying to get cell service. "I'm calling 911, he said. "This isn't right." But before Jake could get through to anyone, Marcus yelled, "Guys, you need to see this." He had walked around to the other side of the tent and was pointing at something. We all jogged over to where he was standing. The back of the tent had a large gash in it. Not like it had been torn by branches or animals, but cut. Clean, deliberate cuts in a pattern, like someone had used a knife to slice the fabric in precise lines. And through those cuts we could see, inside the tent, there was a person in there, a man lying on his side in a sleeping bag. He wasn't moving. and from what we could see, he'd been dead for a while. But here's the thing that still gives me nightmares. The cuts in the tent weren't made from the outside. The fabric was pushed outward, meaning whoever made those cuts had done it from inside the tent. The dead man had sliced his way out of his own tent, then somehow ended up back inside it. We immediately called the police and waited for them to arrive. While we were waiting, we noticed other things that didn't make sense. There were no hiking boots outside the tent, no backpack, no camping gear except for the tent and sleeping bag, no car in the small parking area where the trail starts. When the authorities finally got there and processed the scene, they confirmed our worst fears. The man had been dead for at least a week, maybe longer, but we knew for a fact that tent hadn't been there Friday afternoon. The police asked us a bunch of questions, took our contact information, and told us the area would be closed while they investigated. We packed up and left, but I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. A few days later, I called the detective handling the case to see if they'd learned anything new. He was reluctant to share details, but he did tell me something that made my blood run cold. The man they found had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier. He'd gone on a solo camping trip and never came home. But here's the kicker. He'd been camping in a state park about 200 miles south of where we found him. How does a dead man's tent show up overnight in a completely different location, 200 miles from where he was last seen alive? And how do you cut your way out of a tent after you're already dead? The detective said they were treating it as a homicide. But between you and me, I don't think any human being moved that tent. I think something else found that dead camper and decided to relocate him. Something that wanted him closer to other people, other campers. We haven't been back to our spot since then. I don't think we ever will. The image of someone cutting their way out of a tent from the inside, only to end up back inside it dead, is going to haunt me for weeks. Add in the impossible logistics of a week-old corpse somehow travelling 200 miles to appear overnight in their camping spot, and you've got a situation that defies all logical explanation. Whatever moved that tent wanted it to be found, and that's somehow more terrifying than if it had just been a random murder. That camping story is absolutely chilling because it breaks every rule of how reality is supposed to work. A corpse doesn't just relocate itself 200 miles overnight, and dead people definitely don't cut their way out of tents. The fact that something intelligent enough to move an entire campsite wanted those guys to find it suggests they stumbled into something way bigger and more dangerous than a simple murder. I'd never camp in those woods again either. Our next story comes from a user called Night Shift Nurse, and the title alone made my skin crawl. I work in a nursing home, and the residents keep talking to someone who isn't there. I've been a night shift nurse at Sunset Manor for about 8 months now. It's a decent place as nursing homes go, clean, well-staffed during the day, and the residents are mostly sweet elderly folks who just need help with daily activities. Night shift is usually pretty quiet. Most residents sleep through the night, and I just do medication rounds, check on anyone who needs it, and handle the occasional emergency. But about 6 weeks ago, something started happening that I can't explain. It began with Mrs. Patterson in room 14. She's 89, has moderate dementia, but she's usually pretty calm at night. I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds when I heard her talking to someone in her room. This isn't unusual. Dementia patients often have conversations with people who aren't there, usually family members from their past. But as I got closer to her door, I realised she wasn't talking to a memory. She was having a back and forth conversation with someone who was apparently responding to her. "Oh, I know, dear," she was saying. "It must be so cold down there. How long have you been waiting?" Pause. "Since 1987? My goodness, that is a long time. Are you sure no one else can see you?" Another pause. "Well, I can see you just fine. You're a lovely young woman. What did you say your name was again?" I knocked gently and entered the room. Mrs. Patterson was sitting up in bed, looking toward the corner near her window. She smiled when she saw me. "Oh, Amanda," she said. "I'd like you to meet my new friend. She says her name is Rebecca." I looked toward the corner, Nothing there except shadows and the outline of a chair. "That's nice, Mrs. Patterson," I said, playing along like we're trained to do. "But it's very late. Maybe Rebecca should let you get some sleep." Mrs. Patterson looked back toward the corner and nodded. "Amanda says you should come back tomorrow night. She's very nice, but she needs her rest too." She seemed satisfied with this and settled back into bed. I thought that was the end of it. The next night, I heard voices coming from room 18. Mr. Rodriguez, who usually sleeps like a rock, was having an animated conversation with someone. When I checked on him, he was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, talking to the same corner where Mrs. Patterson had been looking the night before. "You followed me here from down the hall?" he was asking. "Well, that's all right. I don't mind the company. Gets lonely at night. Same pattern, same corner, same pauses like someone was responding. Over the next few weeks it spread. Room by room, more residents started having these conversations. Always at night, always facing that same general direction, always with someone named Rebecca, who they described as a young woman with dark hair. The weird part is, these are residents with varying degrees of cognitive function. Some, like Mrs. Patterson, have dementia, but others, like Mr. Chen in room 22, are sharp as tacks mentally. And they're all describing the same person in the same way. I started keeping notes. Rebecca is apparently in her 20s, has long dark hair, and is wearing what the residents describe as old-fashioned clothes. She's always cold, has been waiting since 1987, and moves from room to room, visiting different residents each night. The residents aren't scared of her. If anything, they seem comforted by her presence. They tell me she's polite, asks about their families, and listens to their stories. Mrs. Williams in room 11 said Rebecca cried when she told her about losing her husband. I decided to do some research. I went through employment records, resident records, anything I could find from 1987. That's when I found Rebecca Martinez. She was a 23-year-old nursing assistant who worked at Sunset Manor. According to the records, she died in a car accident on December 15th, 1987, while driving home from her night shift. The accident happened in the parking lot. She'd fallen asleep at the wheel after working a double shift and crashed into the brick wall at the back of the property, the wall that's directly below the windows, where the residents keep seeing her. I found her employee photo in the old files. Long, dark hair, young, pretty, wearing the old-style nursing uniform they used in the 80s. I showed the photo to some of the residents who'd been talking to Rebecca. Every single one of them immediately identified her. "That's her," Mrs. Patterson exclaimed. "That's my friend Rebecca. Isn't she lovely?" But here's where it gets really strange. I started staying later into my shifts, trying to see if I could observe these conversations more closely. 3 nights ago, I was in the hallway around 3 a.m. when I heard Mrs. Patterson talking to Rebecca again. I crept up to her doorway and listened. Mrs. Patterson was asking Rebecca about her family, where she lived, normal conversation topics. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A second voice responded. Faint, like it was coming from very far away, but definitely there. A young woman's voice saying, "I lived with my mother before the accident. I miss her so much." I peered around the doorframe. Mrs. Patterson was looking toward the corner, nodding and smiling, but the corner wasn't empty anymore. There was a faint outline there, like heat shimmer in the shape of a person. As I watched, the shimmer became clearer. I could make out the silhouette of a young woman in an old-fashioned nursing uniform. She was translucent, but definitely there, and she was looking right at me. Our eyes met for just a second before she faded away completely. Mrs. Patterson looked confused for a moment, then settled back into bed like nothing had happened. I haven't told anyone about this. Who would believe me? But I've been thinking about Rebecca Martinez, working night shifts in this same building 35 years ago. Maybe she loved this job, loved taking care of people. Maybe she doesn't realise she died. Or maybe she does, but can't leave because the residents still need her. The thing is, since Rebecca started visiting, the residents seem happier. They sleep better, they're more social during the day, and several family members have commented on how much brighter their loved ones seem lately. Maybe some ghosts aren't here to haunt us. Maybe some are here to heal. I'm working another night shift tonight. If I see Rebecca again, I think I'm going to thank her for taking such good care of our residents. Even in death, she's still doing what she loved most. That story actually gave me chills in the best possible way. The idea of a nurse who loved her job so much that she continues caring for residents even after death is both beautiful and haunting. Rebecca doesn't seem malevolent at all. She's providing comfort to elderly people who are often forgotten and lonely. Sometimes the most powerful ghost stories aren't about revenge or terror, but about love that transcends death itself. Our final story tonight comes from someone called Subway Worker Mike, and it's titled, "I work maintenance for the subway system, and there are tunnels on our maps that don't exist." I've been working maintenance for the Metropolitan Transit Authority for about 7 years now. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady, and I like being underground. There's something peaceful about the tunnels when the trains aren't running, just you, your tools, and miles of concrete and steel stretching out in every direction. Part of my job involves routine inspections of abandoned sections of the subway system. The city's been building and rebuilding these tunnels for over a century, and there are lots of areas that were sealed off when new routes were built or old ones were decommissioned. Most of them are just empty corridors now, but we still have to check them periodically for structural issues, water damage, that kind of thing. Every maintenance worker gets issued a set of maps showing the entire subway system, including the abandoned sections. These maps are incredibly detailed, showing every tunnel, every junction, every sealed entrance. They have to be accurate because getting lost down there is no joke. Some of these tunnels go for miles without any exit points. About 3 months ago, I was assigned to inspect a section of abandoned track in the lower level beneath the 42nd Street station. According to my map, there should have been a straight tunnel running east to west for about half a mile, before hitting a sealed wall where the old line connected to what's now the shuttle to Grand Central. I'd been in this section before, probably 6 or 7 times over the years. Same layout every time. Straight tunnel, some old electrical boxes, a few maintenance alcoves, then the sealed wall at the end. Simple inspection, in and out in an hour. But when I got down there that day, something was different. About halfway through the tunnel, there was an opening in the south wall that I'd never seen before. Not a doorway or an official entrance, just a rough hole in the concrete, like someone had broken through from the other side. I checked my map. According to the diagram, there should have been solid earth on the other side of that wall. No tunnel, no room, nothing, but I could feel air moving through the opening, and when I shined my flashlight inside, I could see it opened up into another tunnel running perpendicular to the one I was in. This was weird, but not unheard of. Sometimes old maps are wrong, or construction crews find previously unknown spaces. I radioed back to dispatch to report the discrepancy and ask if I should investigate. My supervisor, Tony, told me to take a quick look and document what I found. "Probably just an old utility tunnel that didn't make it onto the maps," he said. I squeezed through the opening and found myself in a tunnel that looked much older than the main subway system. The walls were brick instead of concrete, and the ceiling was arched like the really old parts of the system from the early 1900s. But the strange thing was how clean it was. No graffiti, no debris, no signs that anyone had been down there in decades. The tunnel extended in both directions beyond the reach of my flashlight. I chose to go left and started walking. After about 200 yards, I came to a junction where this tunnel intersected with another one. I checked my map again. According to the official documentation, I was standing in the middle of solid bedrock. I took some photos and made notes, then decided to explore a little further. The right branch of the junction led to what looked like a small platform, like a subway station that was never completed. There were even old-style tile work on the walls, white with a green border, similar to stations from the 1920s, but here's where it gets really weird. Mounted on the wall of this phantom platform was a sign, clean, new-looking, like it had been installed recently. It read, "Deep level, authorised personnel only." Deep level? I'd never heard of any section of the subway system called deep level, and the sign looked nothing like standard MTA signage. Different font, different style, different mounting brackets. I took pictures of everything and headed back. When I got to the surface, I immediately went to Tony with my photos and notes. He looked at them for a long time, without saying anything. "Mike," he finally said, "I need you to forget about this tunnel. Don't put it in your report, don't mention it to anyone else, and don't go back down there." I was confused. Why? What's the big deal? "So, there's an old tunnel that's not on the maps. That happens sometimes, right?" Tony looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then pulled me into his office. "Mike, you're not the first person to find that tunnel, and every time someone does, I get a call from people way above my pay grade telling me to shut it down." He went to his filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. Inside were photos and reports from other maintenance workers going back at least 15 years, all describing the same tunnel, the same platform, the same sign. "The thing is," Tony continued, "that tunnel doesn't just appear randomly. It only shows up when something bad is about to happen. Subway accident, system failure, something that's going to hurt people." He showed me dates from the reports. Every single one was dated within 48 hours of a major incident on the subway system. Derailments, electrical fires, platform collapses, always something serious. Always something that could have been prevented if someone had known about it in advance. "The higher-ups think that tunnel is some kind of warning system," Tony said. "Like the old subway system itself is trying to tell us when something's wrong." I thought he was losing his mind. "Come on, Tony, you're talking about supernatural subway tunnels? That's crazy." He shrugged. "Maybe it is, but I've been doing this job for 23 years and I've learned not to ignore patterns. You found that tunnel on a Tuesday. If I'm right, something's going to go wrong somewhere in the system by Thursday." I left his office thinking Tony had been underground too long and it was affecting his judgment. But Wednesday night, around 11 p.m, there was a massive electrical fire in the tunnel between Union Square and 14th Street. No one was hurt, but it shut down service for 2 days and could have been catastrophic if it had happened during rush hour. The next week, I couldn't stop thinking about what Tony had told me. I did some digging in the old MTA archives, looking for any reference to deep level or unusual tunnel discoveries. What I found made my skin crawl. Going back to the 1920s, there are scattered reports of maintenance workers finding tunnels that shouldn't exist. Always the same description. Old brick construction, clean corridors, signs referring to deep level, and always within 48 hours of the discovery, some kind of accident or system failure. The reports stopped appearing in official documentation after 1967, but I found references to them in personal journals and union newsletters. It's like someone made a decision to stop officially acknowledging these discoveries, but the discoveries kept happening. I haven't been back to that section of tunnel, and I've been trying to follow Tony's advice and forget about it. But 3 days ago, I got assigned to inspect a different, abandoned section near the Brooklyn Bridge station. Halfway through my inspection, I found another hole in the wall, another tunnel that shouldn't exist, another clean corridor leading to another platform with another sign reading, "Deep Level Authorized Personnel Only." I didn't report it this time. I just documented it privately and waited to see what would happen. Yesterday, there was a signal failure that caused a 3-train backup during morning rush hour. Minor compared to some incidents, but it easily could have been much worse if the timing had been different. I think Tony's right. I think there's something about the subway system that we don't understand, something that's been trying to warn us for almost a century. Maybe it's the collective consciousness of all the workers who built these tunnels, or maybe it's something else entirely. All I know is that every time I find one of these tunnels, something goes wrong within 48 hours. And I'm starting to think that's not a coincidence. I'm scheduled to work another inspection tomorrow. Part of me hopes I don't find any more holes in the walls, but part of me wonders what would happen if I ignored the warnings and just walked past one of those deep-level signs. Maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved. That story perfectly captures the eerie feeling of urban infrastructure having its own consciousness. The idea that the subway system itself might be trying to prevent disasters through mysterious tunnels that appear as warnings is both fascinating and terrifying. It makes you wonder how many other unexplained phenomena in our cities might actually be attempts by something larger than ourselves to keep us safe. The fact that these discoveries have been happening for almost a century but get officially suppressed adds another layer of institutional horror to the whole thing. And that's where we're going to wrap up tonight's dive into the darker corners of Reddit. These stories remind us that horror doesn't always come from monsters or supernatural entities. Sometimes it comes from the breakdown of reality itself, from the familiar becoming inexplicably wrong, from the realization that the world we think we know might be far stranger and more dangerous than we ever imagined. If you made it this far, you're clearly someone who appreciates a good scary story. So consider subscribing for more content like this. I'm always digging through Reddit to find the stories that will keep you awake at night, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Until next time, sleep tight and maybe check those locks one more time before you do. Whether you believe in these stories or not, they all share one common thread. They challenge our understanding of what's possible in a world that we think we have figured out. The idea that death doesn't always mean the end, that our cities might have their own protective consciousness, that some spirits choose to heal rather than harm. These concepts force us to question the boundaries between the living and the dead, between the natural and the supernatural. What strikes me most about tonight's collection is how many of these experiences happen to ordinary people doing ordinary things. Harold's neighbour wasn't seeking out the paranormal. He just wanted a quiet place to live. The security guard was simply doing his job. The camping friends were following a routine they'd done dozens of times before. Sometimes horror finds us in the most mundane moments, turning the familiar into something that will haunt us forever. The subway maintenance worker's story particularly gets to me because it suggests that even our urban infrastructure might be more alive than we realise. The idea that century-old tunnels could develop their own consciousness, their own protective instincts, makes you look at every building, every street, every underground space differently. What if the places we've built have been watching us all along? These stories remind us that the world is full of mysteries we may never solve, experiences that defy explanation, and encounters that change people forever. Whether they're real or not almost doesn't matter. They tap into something primal in all of us, that deep-seated understanding that there's more to existence than what we can see and touch and measure. As we reach the end of our journey through these unsettling tales, I can't help but think about how these stories stay with us long after we've heard them. They plant seeds of doubt in our minds, make us pause at empty doorways, listen a little more carefully to unexplained sounds in the night. What's fascinating is how each of these encounters fundamentally changed the people who experienced them. The security guard who can no longer work at the hospital, the campers who abandoned their favourite spot forever, the maintenance worker who now sees warnings in every tunnel. These weren't just scary moments, they were life-altering experiences that redefined how these people see reality itself. And maybe that's what makes these stories so compelling. They don't just frighten us, they make us question everything we thought we knew about the world around us. They suggest that beneath the surface of our ordinary lives, there's an entire hidden layer of existence that most of us never glimpse. The nursing home story particularly resonates with me because it offers a different perspective on the supernatural. Not every ghost story has to be about terror and malevolence. Sometimes the spirits that linger are the ones who loved their earthly duties so much that death couldn't convince them to stop caring. Rebecca Martinez found her purpose in life, and apparently she found it in death too. These Reddit posts, whether completely true or masterfully crafted fiction, serve as modern campfire stories. They're shared in the digital equivalent of gathering around a fire in the dark, passing along tales that make us feel less alone in our fears and more connected to the mysteries that surround us all. The beautiful thing about stories like these is that they remind us we're still capable of wonder, still able to be surprised by the impossible. In a world where we think science has explained everything, where we carry computers in our pockets and can video chat with people on the other side of the planet, these tales whisper that maybe, just maybe, there are still things beyond our understanding. So as you go about your daily life, remember Harold's faithful footsteps, Rebecca's gentle presence, and the subway tunnels that appear to warn us of danger. Remember that the security guard's recording captured something that shouldn't exist, and that somewhere out there, a figure in an old-fashioned suit still approaches stranded drivers on dark highways. Whether you believe or not, these stories have done their job. They've made you think, made you wonder, made you look twice at shadows and listen more carefully to the sounds your house makes when you're trying to sleep. If these tales have kept you company tonight, if they've given you that perfect mix of terror and fascination that only the best scary stories can provide, then stick around. There are always more mysteries to uncover, more impossible experiences shared by people who swear they're telling the truth. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready for more journeys into the unknown, because trust me, we've only scratched the surface of what's lurking in the darker corners of the internet. Until next time, sleep well. And remember, sometimes the most ordinary places hide the most extraordinary secrets. I thought my roommate was stealing my food until I caught my girlfriend red-handed. I'm 24, been living with my roommate Jake for about 8 months now. Great guy, clean, pays his bills on time, never brings random people over at weird hours. We split groceries pretty evenly, each buy our own stuff, and generally stay out of each other's way. About 3 months ago, I started noticing my food going missing. Nothing dramatic at first, just small things. A yogurt here, some leftover pizza there, maybe a sandwich I swore I'd saved for lunch the next day. I figured maybe I was just forgetting what I'd eaten, or maybe Jake was grabbing something in a pinch and would replace it later. But then it got worse. Entire meals I'd prepped for the week would vanish overnight. I'd buy a pack of those fancy protein bars, and half of them would be gone by morning. My special coffee creamer, the expensive kind I splurge on, would disappear faster than it should have. I started getting genuinely annoyed because this stuff adds up, you know? I didn't want to be that roommate who makes a big deal over food, so I started keeping mental notes. Monday, made 4 chicken meals for meal prep. Tuesday morning, only 2 left. Wednesday, bought a dozen bagels. Thursday, 6 missing. It was becoming undeniable that someone was helping themselves to my stuff. The logical suspect was Jake. He was the only other person with access to the apartment, and I'd seen him eyeing my fancy groceries before. Plus, he'd made a few comments about how he wished he could afford the organic stuff I buy, how his budget was pretty tight lately. I felt bad for the guy, but not bad enough to fund his grocery habits without him asking. I decided to have a conversation with him. Nothing confrontational, just a casual, hey, maybe we could work out a system if you need to borrow food sometimes. Jake looked genuinely confused when I brought it up. He swore up and down that he wasn't touching my stuff. Seemed actually offended that I'd suggest it. But what else was I supposed to think? Things got tense between us after that. Jake started acting weird around me, like he was walking on eggshells. I felt guilty for accusing him, but my food was still disappearing. If anything, it got worse after our conversation. Entire containers of leftovers would vanish. Fresh fruit I'd just bought would be gone within hours. I was starting to think Jake was taking my food out of spite now, like some weird passive-aggressive revenge for calling him out. The atmosphere in the apartment became uncomfortable. We barely talked beyond basic pleasantries. I started keeping some of my groceries in my bedroom, which felt absolutely ridiculous, but I was desperate. Then my girlfriend Lisa started staying over more often. She'd been coming around maybe once or twice a week, but suddenly she was there almost every night. Said her apartment was having heating issues and her roommate was being dramatic about something. I didn't mind. I loved having her around, and she always offered to help with groceries when she stayed over. Actually, Lisa was amazing about it. She'd show up with ingredients to cook dinner for both of us, would replace anything she used from my kitchen, even bought extra coffee and snacks for when she was there. I thought it was sweet how considerate she was being, especially compared to what I thought Jake was doing. One night, Lisa suggested we set up a camera in the kitchen to catch Jake in the act. She was genuinely outraged on my behalf, said it was completely unacceptable for him to be stealing from me and lying about it. She even offered to buy one of those small security cameras, said we could hide it behind the coffee maker where it wouldn't be obvious. I felt weird about essentially spying on my roommate, but I was so frustrated and the situation was affecting my living situation so badly that I agreed. We set up this tiny camera, angled it so it would catch anyone going through the fridge or pantry. Lisa was almost excited about it, said she couldn't wait to prove what a liar Jake was being. The camera recorded for 3 days. I was working late that Thursday night. Wouldn't be home until almost midnight. Lisa had stayed over, but said she was going to bed early because she had an early morning meeting. When I got home, she was already asleep, and I crashed without thinking about checking the camera footage. Friday morning, I remembered to check the recording while I was having coffee. I fast-forwarded through hours of empty kitchen footage, expecting to catch Jake sneaking around at some point. Instead, what I saw made my stomach drop through the floor. There was Lisa, around 11 p.m, going through my fridge like she owned the place. She wasn't just grabbing a quick snack or something she needed for a recipe. She was systematically taking my meal prep containers, my expensive yogurts, my protein bars, loading them into her bag. She even took condiments, stuff I'd specifically bought because I like certain brands. I watched her make multiple trips, filling what looked like a cooler bag with my groceries. She was being careful and quiet, clearly trying not to wake me up, except I wasn't even home yet. The timestamp showed she'd been at this for almost 20 minutes, just casually robbing me blind while I thought she was asleep in my bed. The worst part was seeing her eat some of my food right there in the kitchen. She opened one of my meal prep containers and ate half of it standing at the counter, then put the rest in her bag, like she was sampling the goods before deciding what to steal. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, watching my girlfriend of 8 months systematically steal from me, while simultaneously encouraging me to blame my innocent roommate. The level of manipulation was staggering. She'd been playing concerned girlfriend, offering to help catch the thief, even buying a camera to gather evidence against someone she knew was completely innocent. When Lisa woke up that morning, I didn't say anything immediately. I was too shocked, too angry, trying to process what I'd discovered. She acted completely normal, kissed me goodbye, said she'd see me that evening, even made a comment about hoping we'd catch Jake on camera soon. I spent the entire day at work replaying the footage in my head, thinking about all the times she'd offered to bring groceries, all her concerned comments about Jake, how outraged she'd acted on my behalf. She'd been stealing from me for months, while positioning herself as my ally against the supposed real thief. That evening, when Lisa came over with takeout for dinner, acting like the perfect girlfriend, I finally confronted her. I showed her the footage without any preamble, just opened my laptop and pressed play. The look on her face went from confusion to recognition to pure panic in about 5 seconds. She tried to deny it at first, said the video was unclear, maybe it was someone else. When that didn't work, she switched to justification, said she was basically living there half the time anyway, so it was really shared food. When I pointed out that she'd been encouraging me to blame Jake, she got defensive, said she never explicitly told me to accuse him. Then came the tears and the apologies. She claimed she was embarrassed about her financial situation, said she didn't want me to know she was struggling to afford groceries, said she was planning to tell me eventually that she was going to start contributing more to household expenses. Every excuse contradicted the last one. The relationship ended that night. I couldn't get past the manipulation, the way she'd let me damage my relationship with Jake, while she was the one causing all the problems. She'd sat there listening to me stress about the missing food, watching me feel guilty for suspecting my roommate, all while being the actual culprit. Jake and I had a long conversation after Lisa left. I showed him the footage, apologised for months of suspicion and weird behaviour. He was honestly pretty cool about it, said he'd figured something else was going on, but didn't know what. We're back to being good roommates now, though I think we both learned something about assuming the worst about people. I still can't believe someone I trusted completely was stealing from me while helping me try to catch the supposed thief. The audacity of it still blows my mind. That story right there is exactly why trust issues exist. Imagine being so manipulative that you help your boyfriend set up surveillance to catch yourself stealing from him. The psychological games some people play are absolutely unhinged. Poor Jake probably thought he was living with a paranoid person for months. At least this guy found out before he moved in with her, or something even more serious. Let's move on to this next one. And honestly, this one's even more twisted. My sister tried to steal my identity to get out of her student loans. My sister Rebecca has always been the type to take shortcuts. Growing up, she'd copy my homework, forge our parents' signatures on permission slips, find ways to get out of doing chores by making elaborate excuses. I always figured she'd grow out of it, but apparently, some people just double down on being terrible as adults. Rebecca is 3 years younger than me, and we've never been particularly close. Different interests, different friend groups, different approaches to life. I worked through college, graduated with minimal debt, got a decent job in accounting. She partied her way through a more expensive school, racked up massive student loans, and graduated with a degree she's never really used. About 2 years ago, Rebecca's loan payments started coming due. We're talking serious money here, like $40,000 in debt from a combination of tuition, living expenses, and what I suspect was a lot of unnecessary spending during her college years. She got a job at a retail store, but it was barely covering her rent, let alone loan payments. I knew she was struggling because she'd started asking family members for money. Small amounts at first, 100 here, 50 there, always with some sob story about unexpected expenses or emergencies. Our parents helped when they could, but they're not wealthy people. I lent her money a few times too, though she never paid any of it back. Rebecca started getting really stressed about her financial situation. She'd complain constantly about how unfair it was that education was so expensive, how she shouldn't have to pay back money she used for bettering herself, how the system was designed to keep people in debt forever. Valid points, maybe, but complaining wasn't making the payments go away. Then she started talking about ways to get out of paying her loans. She'd researched bankruptcy, looked into income-driven repayment plans, even considered moving to another country to escape the debt. None of these options were realistic for her situation, but she was getting desperate. About 6 months ago, Rebecca started asking me weird questions about my financial situation, how much I made, what my credit score was, whether I had any major debts. I thought she was just comparing our situations, maybe feeling bad about her own choices. I didn't think much of it. She also started asking for copies of documents, said she needed help with her taxes, wanted to see how I'd organise my paperwork, needed examples of properly filled out forms. I helped her out, figured it was good that she was finally trying to get her finances in order. Looking back, I should have been suspicious when she asked for a copy of my social security card. She said she'd lost hers and needed the format to request a replacement. I thought it was a weird request, but she was my sister, and I trusted her. I made her a copy and didn't think about it again. The first sign something was wrong came when I got a call from my bank about unusual activity on my account. Someone had tried to open a credit card using my information, but there were inconsistencies in the application that flagged it for review. I figured it was just identity theft. Maybe someone had gotten my information from a data breach or something. I put a fraud alert on my credit report and didn't worry too much about it. These things happen, right? But then I got another call, this time from a different bank, about a loan application. Then another credit card company. Then a mortgage broker. Someone was definitely using my identity, and they were being aggressive about it. I pulled my credit report and found multiple hard inquiries, all recent, all for significant amounts of credit. Whoever was doing this wasn't just trying to get a quick cash advance, they were attempting to access serious money using my identity and credit score. The mortgage application was what really scared me. Someone had applied for a $200,000 home loan using my information. If that had gone through, I would have been legally responsible for a massive debt I never agreed to take on. I spent hours on the phone with credit agencies, banks, and fraud departments trying to sort out the mess. Everyone kept asking if I had any idea who might have access to my personal information. I kept saying no, it must be some random criminal who got my data somehow. Then I got a call that changed everything. A loan officer from Rebecca's student loan company called me by mistake. They were trying to reach her about a payment transfer request, but somehow they'd gotten my number. During the conversation, they mentioned that someone had been trying to transfer her loans to a different social security number, claiming there had been an error in the original application. That's when it clicked. I asked the loan officer what social security number they had on file for the transfer request. They couldn't give me the full number for privacy reasons, but they confirmed the last 4 digits, my last 4 digits. Rebecca had been trying to transfer her student loan debt to my social security number. She was attempting to make me legally responsible for her $40,000 in educational debt. All those credit applications, the mortgage inquiry, everything had been her trying to build up available credit under my name so she could handle the loan transfer. I confronted her immediately, called her while I was still on the phone with the loan company, asked her directly if she'd been using my identity to try to get out of her student loan payments. She hung up on me. When I showed up at her apartment an hour later, she tried to play innocent at first, said she had no idea what I was talking about. Maybe someone was using both our identities. What a crazy coincidence. But I had too much evidence by then. I'd brought copies of all the credit applications, the loan transfer request, even the timeline of when she'd asked me for various documents. Everything lined up perfectly with her attempts to steal my identity. Eventually, she broke down and admitted it. Said she was desperate, couldn't handle the debt payments, thought she could just transfer everything to my name, and I'd never find out. She actually seemed to think this was a reasonable plan, like I wouldn't notice taking on $40,000 in debt. The worst part was her justification. She said I made more money than her, had better credit, could handle the payments easier than she could, like that gave her the right to steal my identity and saddle me with her debt. She even suggested we could work out a payment plan where she'd pay me back gradually, as if that made identity theft acceptable. I reported her to the police that same day, filed reports with the credit agencies, the banks, everyone who needed to know that the applications had been fraudulent. It took weeks to clean up the mess she'd created, and I'm still monitoring my credit report obsessively. Rebecca was arrested 2 weeks later. She's been charged with identity theft, fraud, and a bunch of other things I don't fully understand. Our parents are devastated, can't believe one of their daughters would do this to the other. I feel bad for them, but I couldn't just let this slide. The family relationships are pretty much destroyed now. Some relatives think I should have handled this privately, worked something out with Rebecca instead of involving law enforcement. But she stole my identity and tried to stick me with massive debt. That's not a family dispute, that's a crime. Rebecca's lawyer has been trying to negotiate some kind of plea deal, but I'm not interested in dropping the charges. She didn't just make a mistake or a bad decision, she systematically planned to ruin my financial life to solve her own problems. I still can't believe my own sister thought it was acceptable to steal my identity. The level of entitlement and selfishness is staggering. This is absolutely insane. Your own sister trying to transfer $40,000 in debt to your name and thinking you'd never notice. The audacity is breathtaking. And then having the nerve to suggest a payment plan after committing identity theft against her own family member. Some people really have no limits when it comes to selfishness. Good on him for pressing charges, because that kind of betrayal deserves serious consequences. Alright, this next story is going to make you question everything you think you know about workplace dynamics. My boss hired his girlfriend, and now I'm basically managing 2 people for the price of 1. I work at a mid-sized marketing agency downtown. Been there for about 3 years, worked my way up from junior account coordinator to senior project manager. It's not the most glamorous job in the world, but the pay is decent, the clients are manageable, and my boss Derek has always been pretty reasonable to work with. Derek's in his early 40s, divorced, has been running this agency for about 8 years. He's one of those guys who tries really hard to be the cool boss, talks about work-life balance while expecting you to answer emails at 9 p.m. But overall, he's not terrible. He stays out of the day-to-day operations mostly, lets his managers actually manage, and doesn't micromanage every little decision. About 4 months ago, Derek started dating this woman named Vanessa. She's maybe 26, works in social media marketing at some startup. Definitely attractive in that Instagram influencer way. Derek was obviously smitten from the beginning, started talking about her constantly, showing everyone pictures of their weekend trips, the whole nauseating routine. I didn't think much of it at first. Derek's personal life was his business, and if he was happy, good for him. Plus, when the boss is in a good mood, it usually makes everyone's job easier. He was definitely more relaxed, less likely to stress about minor issues, more willing to approve budget increases for projects. Then Derek announced that Vanessa would be joining our team as a social media specialist. Said we'd been needing someone with her skill set anyway, and it was perfect timing since she was looking for new opportunities. He presented it like this brilliant business decision that had nothing to do with their relationship. The red flags were immediate. First, we hadn't been looking for a social media specialist. Our clients either handled their own social media or worked with external contractors. Second, Vanessa's resume was pretty thin. A couple years at a startup that folded, some freelance work, nothing that screamed senior level experience. Third, Derek offered her a salary that was about $15,000 more than what I was making when I started in a similar role. But Derek was the boss, and if he wanted to hire his girlfriend, that was his prerogative. I figured maybe she'd prove herself. Maybe she actually did have skills that weren't obvious from her resume. I tried to keep an open mind. Vanessa's first day was a disaster. Derek introduced her to everyone like she was some kind of social media guru, built up these massive expectations about how she was going to revolutionize our client strategies. Then he basically dumped her on me, said I'd be her supervisor and could help her get oriented. The problem became clear immediately. Vanessa had no idea how to work in a professional agency environment. She was used to the startup world where you just post whatever, whenever, with no client approval processes, no brand guidelines, no legal compliance issues. She couldn't understand why we needed 3 rounds of revisions on a simple Instagram post. Her first client presentation was painful to watch. She'd put together this elaborate social media strategy that completely ignored the client's target demographic, their brand voice, their budget constraints, everything we'd discussed in the briefing meeting. The client was polite but clearly confused about why we were suggesting TikTok dances for their law firm. After the meeting, I pulled Vanessa aside to give her some feedback, tried to be constructive, explained how our client approval process worked, suggested some resources for learning about different industries. She listened with this blank expression, then said she'd run everything by Derek first before making any changes. That became the pattern. Every piece of feedback I gave her, every suggestion for improvement, every attempt to train her on our processes, she'd immediately go to Derek and present it like I was being difficult or trying to sabotage her. Derek would then come to me and ask why I was being so hard on Vanessa, said she was just adjusting to a new environment and needed support. Meanwhile, Vanessa's work quality remained consistently terrible. She'd post content without client approval, use copyrighted images without licensing, ignore brand guidelines completely. I was spending hours every day fixing her mistakes, redoing her work, apologizing to clients for deliverables that should never have been sent out. The worst part was that Derek refused to see any of it. When clients complained about social media content, he'd blame miscommunication or unrealistic expectations. When I showed him examples of Vanessa's mistakes, he'd say she was still learning and everyone makes errors. When other team members started complaining about having to redo her work, he said they needed to be more collaborative. It became clear that Derek had no intention of actually managing Vanessa or holding her accountable for her performance. She was his girlfriend, and in his mind, that meant she was automatically qualified, and any criticism was just workplace politics. 3 months in, I was basically doing 2 full-time jobs. My regular project management responsibilities, plus fixing everything Vanessa touched, plus training her on basics she should have known before being hired. I was working 12-hour days regularly, staying late to repair client relationships, coming in early to review her work before it went out. I tried talking to Derek about the workload issue, explained that I was spending more time managing Vanessa's mistakes than doing my actual job, suggested maybe she needed more formal training or a different role that better matched her experience level. Derek's response was to tell me I was being territorial and needed to embrace change. The breaking point came during a major client campaign launch. We were handling social media for a product release. Everything had been planned for weeks. Content calendar approved, posts scheduled, influencer partnerships arranged. Vanessa decided at the last minute that the approved content was boring and completely changed the messaging without telling anyone. She posted content that contradicted the main advertising campaign, used unauthorized product photos, and included claims about the product that weren't legally approved. The client was furious, threatened to pull their account, demanded to know how something like this could happen. I spent the entire weekend doing damage control, working with legal to address the compliance issues, negotiating with the client to save the relationship, rebuilding the entire campaign from scratch. Vanessa, meanwhile, was at some music festival with Derek, posting Instagram stories about how great their relationship was. Monday morning, Derek called a team meeting to discuss what had gone wrong with the campaign. He presented it like it was a communication breakdown, a learning opportunity for everyone. Never mentioned that his girlfriend had single-handedly sabotaged weeks of work. Never acknowledged that I'd spent my weekend fixing her mess. That's when I realized this situation was never going to improve. Derek was never going to hold Vanessa accountable because doing so would mean admitting he'd made a mistake hiring her. He'd rather sacrifice client relationships and employee morale than deal with the awkwardness of managing his girlfriend. I started looking for new jobs that same week, updated my resume, reached out to contacts, started interviewing with other agencies. I wasn't going to destroy my career covering for someone who had no business being in her position. 2 weeks later, I got an offer from a competing agency. Better salary, better title, better work environment. When I gave Derek my notice, he seemed genuinely shocked, asked what he could do to keep me, offered a raise, promised things would get better. I told him honestly that I couldn't continue doing 2 jobs for the price of one, that the situation with Vanessa was unsustainable, that I needed to work somewhere my contributions were valued. He got defensive, said I was being unprofessional bringing up personal relationships, that Vanessa was a valuable team member who just needed time to develop. My last day was 3 weeks ago. I heard through former colleagues that the client I'd spent the weekend saving ended up pulling their account anyway. 2 other team members have given notice since I left. Vanessa is apparently now the senior social media specialist, basically running the department she's completely unqualified to handle. Derek made his choice. He chose his girlfriend over his business, his employees, his client relationships. I just hope he thinks it was worth it when the agency falls apart. That right there is exactly how businesses destroy themselves from the inside. When the boss starts making hiring decisions with his heart instead of his brain, everyone else pays the price. This guy basically became an unpaid manager for someone who had no business being there in the first place. At least he got out before the whole ship went down completely. Now this next story is going to make you lose faith in humanity for entirely different reasons. I found out my best friend has been catfishing my ex-boyfriend for 2 years. My ex-boyfriend Tyler and I dated for about 1.5 years in college. We broke up amicably when he transferred schools. Just one of those situations where long distance wasn't going to work for either of us. No drama, no hard feelings. We stayed in touch as friends and genuinely wished each other well. My best friend Hannah has been in my life since high school. We went to college together, lived in the same dorm freshman year, shared everything. She was the person I called when Tyler and I broke up, the one who brought me ice cream and listened to me cry about missing him, even though I knew the breakup was the right decision. After Tyler transferred, he started dating someone new pretty quickly. He'd mention her occasionally when we talked, said her name was Jessica, that they'd met through a dating app, that things were going really well. I was happy for him, honestly. Tyler's a good guy, and I wanted him to find someone who made him happy. Hannah seemed less thrilled about Tyler moving on. She'd make little comments about how quickly he'd found someone new, how he probably wasn't over me yet, how rebound relationships never last. I figured she was just being protective, maybe worried that I was more hurt about his new relationship than I was letting on. About 6 months after Tyler transferred, Hannah started acting weird about her own dating life. She'd always been pretty open about the guys she was seeing, would show me their dating app profiles, ask for advice about what to wear on dates, debrief every interaction in exhaustive detail. Suddenly she became secretive. She'd get text messages and smile at her phone, then quickly put it away when I asked who she was talking to. She started declining plans, saying she had dates, but being vague about who with. When I'd ask how things went, she'd just say they were going well and change the subject. I thought maybe she'd found someone she really liked and was being cautious about jinxing it. Hannah had a tendency to get excited about guys too quickly and then be devastated when things didn't work out. Maybe she was trying to protect herself by keeping this relationship more private. The secrecy went on for months. Hannah would disappear for hours at a time, claiming to be on dates or video calls with her mystery boyfriend. She'd mention him occasionally, always in vague terms, said his name was Jake, that he lived in another state, that they were taking things slow because of the distance. Something about the situation felt off to me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Hannah seemed happy, was smiling more, seemed more confident. If she'd found someone who made her feel good about herself, why was she being so secretive about it? About a year into Hannah's mysterious relationship, I was visiting Tyler at his new school. We'd maintained our friendship, and I had some free time during spring break, so I drove down to see how he was settling in. It was nice catching up in person, seeing his new apartment, meeting some of his friends. During dinner, Tyler started talking about Jessica, his girlfriend, how sweet she was, how much they had in common, how easy it was to talk to her about anything. He seemed really smitten, which made me genuinely happy for him. Then he showed me a picture of them together from a recent date, except there was no Jessica in the picture. It was just Tyler, alone, holding his phone like he was taking a selfie with someone, but the other half of the photo was empty. When I asked about it, Tyler looked confused, said Jessica was camera shy, that she'd stepped out of frame right before he took the shot. That seemed odd, but people have different comfort levels with photos. Maybe Jessica just didn't like having her picture taken. But then Tyler showed me more photos from their relationship, and they were all the same. Tyler alone, or Tyler with empty space where his girlfriend should be, or Tyler pointing at something off camera that apparently was Jessica. I started asking more questions about Jessica. What did she look like? Where was she from? What did she do for work? Tyler's answers were surprisingly vague for someone he'd been dating for over a year. He said she was brunette, maybe 5'6", worked in marketing, grew up in the Midwest. Generic details that could describe thousands of people. When I asked if I could meet Jessica during my visit, Tyler said she was busy with work, but maybe next time. He seemed disappointed about it, like he'd really wanted us to meet, but she'd cancelled at the last minute. The more he talked about her, the more something felt wrong. That night, I started putting pieces together. Tyler's girlfriend, Jessica, was supposedly from the Midwest, worked in marketing, and was very private about photos. Hannah's mysterious boyfriend, Jake, was supposedly from another state, and she'd been secretive about their relationship for over a year. The timeline matched up perfectly with when Tyler had started dating Jessica. I started thinking about all the times Hannah had been unavailable, claiming to be on video calls with Jake, all the times she'd disappeared for hours saying she was on virtual dates, all the secretive text messaging and phone calls. What if Jake and Jessica were the same person? What if Hannah was catfishing Tyler? The idea seemed insane, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Hannah had been weird about Tyler dating someone new from the beginning. She'd always been a little jealous of my relationships, competitive in ways that weren't always healthy, and she had access to information about Tyler through me, knew his interests, his personality, his vulnerabilities. I needed proof before I could accuse my best friend of something so elaborate and manipulative. So I started paying more attention to Hannah's behaviour, looking for patterns. Every time she claimed to be talking to Jake, I'd text Tyler to see if he was talking to Jessica. The timing matched up perfectly, every single time. Then I got bold and asked Tyler to describe a recent conversation he'd had with Jessica. He told me about this long discussion they'd had about childhood memories, about growing up in small towns, about feeling like outsiders in high school. I knew those stories because they were Hannah's stories, experiences she'd shared with me over the years. The final confirmation came when Tyler mentioned that Jessica had sent him a care package. He was so excited about it, said she'd included his favourite candy, some books he'd mentioned wanting to read, and a handwritten note that made him cry. He showed me the package and I recognised Hannah's handwriting immediately. I confronted Hannah that same week, didn't beat around the bush, just asked her directly if she was catfishing Tyler. She denied it at first, acted offended that I'd even suggest something so crazy. But when I started listing all the evidence, all the coincidences, all the matching details, she broke down. She admitted everything. For almost 2 years, she'd been pretending to be Jessica, Tyler's long-distance girlfriend. She'd created fake social media profiles, used photos of a random girl she'd found online, built an entire fictional identity. She'd been having hours-long video calls with Tyler where she'd hold the phone so he couldn't see her face, claiming technical difficulties or lighting issues. The worst part was her justification. Hannah said she'd done it because she could see how much Tyler missed me, how he'd never really gotten over our breakup. She convinced herself that she was helping him by giving him someone to talk to, someone who understood him. She claimed she'd planned to end the catfishing gradually, maybe have Jessica move away or break up with him gently. But then Tyler started falling in love with Jessica, started talking about visiting her, about their future together. Hannah got in too deep to back out without destroying him, so she kept it going, kept lying, kept building this elaborate fiction that was inevitably going to collapse. I was horrified. My best friend had been manipulating my ex-boyfriend for 2 years, making him fall in love with a person who didn't exist. She'd stolen stories from my life, used information I'd shared with her in confidence, betrayed both Tyler and me in ways I couldn't even process. I told Hannah she had to come clean to Tyler immediately, had to tell him the truth about Jessica, about the catfishing, about everything. She begged me not to make her do it, said it would destroy him, that he'd never recover from finding out he'd been in love with a lie. When Hannah refused to tell Tyler herself, I realised I had to do it. I couldn't let him continue living in this fantasy, planning a future with someone who didn't exist. He deserved to know the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. I drove back to Tyler's school the next weekend and told him everything, showed him the evidence, explained Hannah's confession, laid out the entire 2-year deception. Tyler went through every emotion possible: denial, anger, heartbreak, betrayal. He'd been planning to propose to Jessica next month, had bought a ring, had been saving money to visit her. The aftermath was devastating for everyone involved. Tyler was crushed not just by the breakup, but by the realization that someone he'd trusted had manipulated him so completely. Hannah lost her best friend and had to live with the knowledge that she'd caused incredible pain to someone who'd never done anything to hurt her. I lost my best friend too. I couldn't forgive Hannah for what she'd done. Couldn't trust someone who was capable of such elaborate manipulation and deception. The friendship we'd built over years was destroyed by her selfishness and jealousy. Tyler and I don't talk anymore either. Not because of anger, but because I'm too connected to the source of his pain. Every time he sees me, he's reminded of Hannah, of Jessica, of the 2 years he spent falling in love with a lie. Hannah moved away a few months later, said she couldn't handle the guilt and the social fallout from what she'd done. I heard she's in therapy, trying to understand why she thought catfishing was acceptable, why she let it go on for so long. I still can't wrap my head around the level of deception involved. Creating fake profiles, maintaining a fictional identity for 2 years, watching Tyler fall in love with someone who didn't exist. The amount of time and energy Hannah put into this lie is staggering. Sometimes I wonder if I should have figured it out sooner, if there were signs I missed. But I never imagined my best friend was capable of something so manipulative and cruel. This is absolutely unhinged behaviour. 2 years of elaborate catfishing, stealing someone else's stories, watching a person fall in love with a complete fabrication. The psychological manipulation involved is terrifying, and the fact that she was planning to let him propose to a fictional person shows just how far she was willing to let this spiral. Some people really have no boundaries when it comes to their own twisted fantasies. This final story is going to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. My mum asked me to pay for my sister's wedding because she spent the wedding fund on a cruise. I'm the oldest of 3 kids, always been the responsible one, the one who worked through college, saved money, made practical decisions. My sister Jenna is the middle child, and she's always been Mum's favourite. Not even subtle about it, just obvious preferential treatment her entire life. When Jenna got engaged last year, my mum was over the moon, started planning this elaborate wedding immediately, talking about venues and flowers and dresses like money was no object. Jenna wanted everything to be perfect, and Mum was determined to make it happen. Mum told everyone she'd been saving for Jenna's wedding since she was born, had a special account set aside just for this purpose, said she wanted to give her daughter the fairy tale wedding she'd always dreamed of. The budget she was talking about was around $30,000, which seemed reasonable for the kind of celebration they were planning. For months, Mum and Jenna spent every weekend visiting venues, tasting cakes, trying on dresses. They'd call me constantly to get my opinion on colour schemes and centerpieces, acting like I was intimately involved in the planning process, even though I lived 3 hours away and was barely consulted on actual decisions. I was happy for Jenna, honestly. She'd found a great guy, they seemed genuinely in love, and if Mum wanted to throw them an expensive party, that was her choice. I offered to help with whatever they needed, maybe handle some of the coordination, since I'm good at organising events. About 6 months before the wedding, Mum started making comments about how expensive everything was turning out to be. Said the venue costs were higher than expected, the catering was more elaborate than she'd planned. The flowers were seasonal and pricey, but she insisted everything was under control, that she had it handled. Then, 3 months before the wedding, Mum called me in a panic, said there had been a problem with the wedding fund, that some unexpected expenses had come up, that she was going to need help covering the final payments. She asked if I could loan her $5,000, just temporarily, until she could figure out the budget shortfall. I was suspicious but agreed to help. $5,000 was a lot of money for me, but it was my sister's wedding, and I didn't want Jenna's big day to be ruined by financial stress. Mum promised she'd pay me back within a month, said it was just a cash flow issue. A month later, Mum asked for another $3,000, said there were more unexpected costs, that the wedding was turning out to be more expensive than anyone had anticipated. Again, I helped out, though I was starting to worry about where all this money was going and how Mum planned to pay me back. 2 weeks before the wedding, Mum dropped the bomb, called me crying, said she needed another $10,000 or they'd have to cancel everything. The venue wanted final payment, the caterer needed their deposit, the florist was threatening to pull out. She was completely panicked, begging me to save Jenna's wedding. At this point, I'd already lent her $8,000 with no clear plan for repayment. Another $10,000 would basically wipe out my emergency fund, money I'd been saving for years. But the wedding was in 2 weeks. Jenna had already sent invitations, and I couldn't bear the thought of my sister's wedding being cancelled. So I gave Mum the money. $18,000 total, nearly my entire savings account. She promised she'd start paying me back immediately after the wedding, said she just needed to get through this crisis, and then everything would be fine. The wedding was beautiful. Jenna looked gorgeous, the venue was perfect, everything went off without a hitch. Mum spent the entire day accepting compliments on how lovely everything was, how perfect the planning had been, how generous she was to give her daughter such an amazing celebration. After the wedding, I started asking Mum about repayment plans. She kept saying she needed a few more weeks to get her finances sorted out, that she was working on it, that I shouldn't worry. Weeks turned into months, and I wasn't seeing any money. Finally, I sat Mum down and asked her directly what had happened to the wedding fund she'd supposedly been saving for years. Where had all that money gone? Why had she needed to borrow so much from me when she claimed to have everything covered? That's when she broke down and told me the truth. There had never been a wedding fund. She'd spent years talking about saving for Jenna's wedding, but she'd never actually set aside any money for it. Every dollar I'd given her had gone directly to wedding expenses because she'd had no savings whatsoever. But it gets worse. About 6 months before Jenna's engagement, Mum had gone on an expensive cruise with her boyfriend. 2 weeks in the Mediterranean, fancy cabin, excursions at every port, the whole luxury experience. She'd spent over $15,000 on that trip, money she'd taken from her general savings account. When Jenna got engaged and Mum realised she actually needed to pay for a wedding, she panicked. She'd spent the money she should have been saving for her daughter's future on a vacation for herself. Rather than admitting this to Jenna or scaling back the wedding plans, she decided to manipulate me into funding the entire celebration. I was furious. Mum had lied to me for months, let me believe I was helping with a temporary cash flow problem, when actually I was paying for my sister's entire wedding. She'd spent years bragging about how she was saving for this day, then spent the money on herself and expected me to cover the difference. When I confronted Mum about the cruise, she got defensive, said she deserved to enjoy her life, that she'd worked hard and earned the right to take vacations, said I was being selfish for begrudging her a little happiness, completely ignored the fact that she'd lied to me and manipulated me into paying for something that was supposed to be her responsibility. I demanded that she start paying me back immediately. $18,000 was serious money, and I needed it back. Mum said she couldn't afford to repay me right away, that her budget was tight, that I'd have to be patient. Suggested maybe I could consider it a gift to Jenna, a wedding present from her big sister. That's when I realised Mum had never intended to pay me back. She'd manipulated me into funding Jenna's wedding by making me think it was a temporary loan, when actually she was planning to treat it like a gift I'd volunteered to give. I told Jenna everything, explained that Mum had lied about the wedding fund, that she'd spent the money on a cruise, that I'd paid for the entire wedding under false pretenses. I expected Jenna to be as outraged as I was, to demand that Mum find a way to repay me. Instead, Jenna got angry at me, said I was trying to ruin her marriage by bringing up money issues, that I should have talked to Mum privately instead of involving her. She actually suggested that since I made more money than Mum, I could afford to lose $18,000 more easily than Mum could afford to pay it back. The family basically chose sides, and I was outnumbered. Mum and Jenna painted me as the selfish sister who was trying to hold money over everyone's head, who couldn't just be happy that the wedding had been beautiful. Extended family members started weighing in, saying I should be more generous with family, that money isn't everything. I ended up taking Mum to small claims court to try to get my money back. Had to sue my own mother to recover the $18,000 she'd manipulated me into lending her. The whole process was humiliating and expensive, but I couldn't afford to just write off that much money. During the court proceedings, everything came out. The cruise receipts, the timeline of when Mum had asked for money, the fact that there had never been any wedding savings. The judge ruled in my favour, ordered Mum to repay me in monthly instalments over 2 years. Mum was furious about the judgment, said I'd embarrassed the family by airing our businesses in court. She made the minimum payments required by law, but treated me like I was some kind of loan shark the entire time. Family gatherings became incredibly awkward, with Mum barely speaking to me and Jenna acting like I was the villain in the situation. The worst part was how Mum continued to play the victim. She'd tell people that I'd sued her over helping with wedding expenses, conveniently leaving out the part about lying to me and spending the wedding money on a cruise. She painted herself as a generous mother who'd been betrayed by her ungrateful daughter. It took almost 3 years to get all my money back. 3 years of tense family relationships, awkward holidays, and passive-aggressive comments about how money had torn our family apart. Mum never once apologised for lying to me, or acknowledged that she'd manipulated me into paying for something that was supposed to be her responsibility. Jenna and I barely speak now. She never got over the fact that I'd involved the courts in what she considered a family matter. She acts like I'm the one who created the problem by expecting to be repaid for money I'd lent under false pretenses. The whole situation taught me that some people will exploit family loyalty without any guilt whatsoever. Mum knew I'd help if she presented it as a temporary emergency, so she constructed an elaborate lie to manipulate me into funding her daughter's wedding after she'd spent the money on herself. I've learned to be much more careful about lending money to family members. Now I ask detailed questions, require written agreements, and don't just trust that people are being honest about their financial situations. It's sad that I have to treat my own family like potential scammers, but that's what happens when trust gets broken so completely. Looking back, I should have demanded to see bank statements before lending any money. Should have asked more questions about where the supposed wedding fund had gone. But I trusted my mother, and she took advantage of that trust to solve a problem she'd created by prioritising her own pleasure over her daughter's future. The cruise photos are still on her Facebook page, by the way. Smiling pictures from her Mediterranean vacation, the one she funded by spending money that should have gone to my sister's wedding. Every time I see those photos, I'm reminded of how easily she manipulated me and how little remorse she's shown about the whole situation. This story makes my blood boil. A mother who lies to her own daughter, spends wedding money on a luxury cruise, then manipulates another daughter into paying for the entire celebration. The audacity of then trying to make him feel guilty for wanting his money back is absolutely staggering. And the sister taking Mum's side after finding out she paid for her own wedding? Family dynamics can be so incredibly toxic when people refuse to take accountability for their actions. Well, there you have it. 4 stories that prove reality is definitely stranger than fiction. These people shared their most unbelievable experiences with complete strangers on the internet. And honestly, I'm grateful they did, because this content is absolutely wild. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, first of all, thank you for sticking around. Second, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button, because I clearly spend way too much time finding these stories for your entertainment. And it would mean a lot to know you're here for more of this chaos. And that's the power of Reddit, folks. People living through situations so unbelievable that they have to share them with strangers on the internet just to process what happened. These stories remind us that no matter how normal your life feels, there's always someone out there dealing with absolute chaos that makes your problems seem manageable. What gets me about these stories is how they all start the same way. Someone thinking they understand their situation, trusting the people around them, going about their normal routine. Then reality comes crashing in and reveals that nothing was what it seemed. The girlfriend stealing food while helping catch the thief, the sister committing identity theft, the boss prioritizing romance over business, the best friend living a double life for 2 years, the mother funding cruises with wedding money. These aren't just stories about bad people doing bad things. They're about how quickly trust can be shattered, how people we love can become strangers, how the people closest to us sometimes know exactly which buttons to push to get what they want. They're about boundaries, consequences, and what happens when someone finally says, enough is enough. Every single one of these people thought they knew the rules of their relationships, thought they understood the people in their lives. But life has a way of teaching us that assumptions can be dangerous, that blind trust can be costly, and that sometimes the person causing all your problems is the last person you'd suspect. The crazy part is, these stories are happening everywhere, all the time. Right now, someone is discovering their roommate isn't the thief. Someone is finding out their family member is using their identity. Someone is realizing their workplace situation is completely unsustainable. Someone is learning their friend has been living a lie. Someone is being manipulated by their own parent. Maybe that's why these stories resonate so much. They remind us that we're not alone in dealing with complicated, messy, sometimes unbelievable human behavior, that other people have survived betrayal, manipulation, and family drama and lived to tell about it. If you're still here after all that chaos, I genuinely appreciate you spending your time with these stories. Hit subscribe if you want more of this kind of content, because apparently the internet never runs out of wild situations that people need to share. Until next time, stay vigilant out there.